Okay, how about now? How about now? I got a new headset and every every time I've been opening a new program, I have to change everything. So I'm sorry about that. Let's try this one more time. Hello, Fab Fam. My name is ZBexx. I'm a professional cosplayer and Magic the Gathering personality who you can hear now, thank goodness. Because today we are going to be reading through the Dominaria United story. That's right, there are chapters 1 through 5. Perfection, Yawgmoth, same difference, right? I don't know. Are you a Phyrexian fan or a For Dominaria fan? I like Fyrexians. I like some heroes. Um, let's see if my other scenes still have audio. More importantly. Okay, so I just have to reset it on every scene. Fabulous. Well, thank you for bearing with me because it wouldn't be my stream without some technical issues. uh, so I do have my lovely 2 camera angles for dramatic effect. Whoa, it got all moved though. I had it all set up for y'all. Like literally, I had it all set up and ready to go. Wow. You seeing this? Amateur hour. Amateur hour. It's all right. There we go. Okay. For dramatic effect, now coming to you from 2 different angles. Glistening in oil and perfection. Yes, I'm here for that. I'm here for that. So, let's go. Let's start this Dominaria United. Oh, what? Sorry. I might be complete by the end of the reading of this. Time is yet to tell. Our chapter that we're starting out with today is episode 1, Echoes in the Dark. Make sure to give me a follow. I am at ZBexx everywhere because this is going to be a series. Even from 3 caverns away, the shriek of breaking metal echoed against the stone. Yet another broken excavator. If Karn had been an organic being, he would have sighed. Instead, he only paused and listened to the excavator's lingering rattling. He pitied his machines. No single setting could accommodate the eccentric geology of the caves of Koilos, where olivine rock was as likely to back into sandstone as cinnabar, but he had no alternative. Here, he'd find the secret to operating the Silex. And he'd find it before any Fyrexian agent could. Condensation beaded on his body. Beaded on his body. Thank you for the follow, David. The droplets joining to slide down his metal plating. No one seemed to believe him, but he knew the truth. The Fyrexians were here on Dominaria. He could feel it. He could feel the stone and the interplanar technology riddling its layers. Karn located the failed excavator to the rear of the cave. The poor excavator seemed as if vexed with its unmanageable job, and its overheated metal housing ticked with a soft tink, tink, tink as it cooled. Karn wove between the stalactites and water pools, careful not to break any of the delicate violet mineral deposits or disturb the freshwater anemones and tiny blind fish, bleached by a life that had until now passed into darkness. Karn placed his hand on the excavator. Shall I fix you then? Yes. Steam sighed from the overheated machine. At his gesture, screws unwound themselves along their threading. He set them aside and removed the housing. A stripped-out gear greeted him. He removed it and set to generating a replacement. His finger tingled with magic, its charge pulling together to generate something from nothing. Metal materialized layer upon layer to create a duplicate part. Thanks so much for the follow, Kelly. Emses. It's just how we do it here. Thanks for being part of the story today. Let's continue. He liked working in the cave's silence. In the sun's absence, only the water's metronome dripped, measured out his days. He was alone here. Other planeswalkers didn't like the interplanar distortion that rubbed at their senses in the caves of Koilos. Karn didn't either, but he appreciated the isolation it gave him. He didn't have to answer to questions or worry about whether the Fyrexians had gotten to someone. Completed them. He could seek the key to operating the Silex in solitude. He would win the fight alone. Okay, we've got our first character change here. I think, here we go. What fight? Oh, that's a little bit too witchy. Joyra's not quite that witchy. What fight? Joyra had placed her hands on her hips in exasperation. Karn, the Fyrexians were defeated centuries ago, and these new ones you told me about are trapped on their plane. Much better. Joyra's totally a little valley girl of Dominaria. Yes, indeed. We'll have to make the hats easier to come off. Does Karn have a hat? This main story is about Karn, so for now, Karn doesn't have a hat. They're here, Karn told her. Defeating the Fyrexians in combat means nothing. They aren't an army. They are hate embodied. They promise Dominaria's destruction. Her voice had softened. Just because of Venser, Karn didn't want to think about Venser. He slipped the gear into its shaft and tightened down. He replaced the housing, sliding it into place, and then threaded in each screw. Small pleasures. He patted the excavator and smiled. That's better, isn't it? He knew it wasn't alive, wasn't responding to him, but it almost felt like it was as he was flipped a lever and watched the excavator move forward and begin digging into the cave wall. The stone shuddered. Fine white dust plumed away from the excavator's planed shovel limbs. Planed shovel limbs. These are some interesting beings. If organic beings had been present, Karn would have to worry about using water to damp down the dust. Their lungs were so fragile. Thank you so much for the bits, B101. Everybody make sure to hit that follow button. We're just getting started. Better that he was alone, wasn't it? No one held him back. Eating and sleeping hours away, no one delayed his progress with chit-chat. The pulverized rock turned violet, one of my favorite colors. And then the excavator's rumble changed to a whine as it hit open air. The excavator stepped back, and Karn peered into the cavern it had opened. The rock had been thin as an eggshell, but extremely hard. On the other side, the cavern's interior was coated in opal. The glow from his eyes caught on the iridescent flecks, suffusing the cavern with an amber glimmer. The dust-coated workshop looked like it came from Urza's mortal lifetime, or even prior, when magic theories and practices were less well-known and technology propelled Dominaria's progress forward. Intricate glass tubing, breakers of varying sizes, defunct burners, powdery remnants of ancient chemicals, wire cutters and rollers for clay, buckets coated with desiccated glazes, gears and cogs, even a small vented forge, tongs placed casually to one side as if its smith, interrupted, had walked away from a task undone. In one corner, shackles, a reminder that the caves of Koilos once housed the ugliness of the Thran before it transformed to Phyrexia. This is getting so good. The workshop had been some artificer's sanctuary and some prisoner's nightmare. Karn recognized a setup meant to exploit sentient beings for experimentation when he saw one. He'd seen too many such scenes when he'd been newly formed. How did this all survive so intact? If only he could share this sight with someone. He really had to stop talking to himself. Karn stepped into the cavern as lightly as his heavy body permitted. What if a stray vibration caused these delicate objects to shatter, destroying data? The books arranged on a single long shelf with jewel-covered spines tempted him with their knowledge, but he dared not take one down. The paper would probably crumble into dust should he touch it. He peeked into the beakers, tinted with dried-out fluids, and then examined the forge ashes. Nothing. He examined the pottery worktop and saw it, a diagram of the silex painted on parchment, a coppery bowl with handles and small black figures marching around its base. A gray slab of clay sat next to the diagram, etched with symbols duplicating those depicted in the diagram's faded paint. Some were in Thran, some in the arcing curves of an unrecognizable script that resembled some symbols on the silex. The clay was damaged, partially illegible, and severed wires lay beside it. What had happened here? I must compare this to the silex. At the faint vibration of his word, the books collapsed into dust. I forgot. I had my soundboard too. Karn winced. He gathered the unfired clay tablet into his hands, careful, and eased out from the ancient workshop. Karn had sighted his base camp some distance from the excavators where the caves had greater stability. Each softly lit tent sheltered his equipment from the steady drip of water. Karn let their brightness guide his steps, the hollow cavern booming with his footfalls. With the tents lit from within, coming back to camp almost felt like coming home. Karn ducked into the largest tent, stepping around the large golden Thran artifact he'd left in front of the entrance. Inside, he shimmied past a broken piece of metal he'd collected days ago, intending to reshape it back to usefulness. He stepped over a pile of power stone shards and sat at his work desk. It, like the rest of his tent, was too cluttered. He had no space for his newest find. Atop the papers and small artifact, he saw Jorah's letters scattered, opened but unanswered. Karn, it's been months. One letter began. Don't you think you should examine why you're doing this? Another letter ended. Mirrodin wasn't your fault, she wrote in another. Please come back. Spencer would have. Hi, AJ. Welcome. Karn shifted the artifact onto one palm and used the other hand to shove Joyra's letters to one side. He slid the artifact onto the worktop, then ducked under his table. He concealed the Silex in a small titanium chest, its lock only accessible to someone like him, someone who knew both the order in which the tumblers and pins needed to be lifted and could manipulate inorganic materials. His lock had no key. He placed his hand on the chest, focused until the tumblers moved. The lid popped open. He removed the Silex. Even his special senses could not identify its copper-like material. Normally, he could reveal any inorganic object's mystery with a touch. Not so the Silex. It made his palms itch with strangeness. A Thran artifact, most said, but he had his doubts. It was Karn's belief that this device came from farther fields than simply the past. He lifted its wide goblet body onto his desk. Its inky characters seemed to move under his worktop's light, transforming from Thran to Phology to Sumafan. The vessel's wide, bowl-like mouth seemed to call to be filled with, according to Sumafan, the memories of the land. He'd been reluctant to test it without confirmation on how to use it. Once he'd been new, he'd reached out and touched the fire blazing in Urza's heart. He'd dropped the cherry red coal, shocked by the sensation, then examined his hand for damage. He'd found none. He'd looked up to see Urza watching him with glittering eyes. Urza hadn't tried to stop him, yet he'd known this would hurt Karn. Why did you give me intelligence if you do not value my personhood? Karn had felt ashamed the moment he asked the question, and yes, Urza chuckled. Ooh, new character. What is Urza gonna wear? I don't feel like I have the best thing around here for Urza. Maybe I just need a staff. Aha! Here we go. You're more valuable to me if you can react intelligently. It's almost a good Teferi voice, but Urza for now. Karn had stared at his aching, undamaged hand. Then why give me pain? Urza had smiled and stroked his white beard. Karn had later learned how to recognize that expression as one Urza made when he thought he was being particularly clever. People are more reluctant to damage something if it causes them pain. But that was only true of some people, wasn't it? Karn glanced at Joyra's unanswered letters. He did not dare involve Joyra or the other planeswalkers, lest he lose them to the Fyrexians like he'd lost Spencer. Even after the Memnarch renamed it, Karn still thought of that plane by its first name, Argentum. It had been Argentum to him when he'd created it and its smallest wonders. How beautiful it had been, a plane glimmering with mathematical precision. The Fyrexians had taken it from him, his plane, his children, Memnarch, his creation. And it was all his fault. He grabbed a rag from the nearby pile to wipe the condensation from his body. He didn't want to drip on his new unfired find and dropped the rag back into the heap. He bent to study the Silex, comparing its symbols to those on the clay tablet. The pattern changed right where the clay tablet's edge seemed rougher. Broken? Had he forgot a piece? He needed to go back for it. Now, since he'd opened the cavern to the cave's moisture, the artifacts in it would degrade. Just then, the death rattle of another excavator echoed through the caverns. Karn wished he could sigh. As it was, he locked away the Silex and his most recent find. He'd repair the excavator. It was located near the ancient workshop anyway, and then he'd look for the missing piece. Oily smoke oozed up from the excavator's housing. It seemed to have a hard mineral deposit, stressing the mechanisms behind the cutting tools. Karn patted it. More than you could cope with? The machine released a gout of smoke. I know the feeling. Before getting started, he peered around the tunnel's edge. The nearby workshop, despite the excavator's rumbling, seemed intact. Good. The excavator could continue its work without risking damage to those artifacts then. After he repaired it, he would search the workshop for the missing piece to the clay tablet. He pulled the machine away and reached into the wall where it was digging. He scooped out something. Liquid. Oily black slop dripped down his fingers, spattered the ground. Could it be... Karn reached with his special sense into the material. For him, he had tried to explain it to Joyra once. This ability was akin to tasting, if taste were to provide information beyond flavor. He felt nothing, as if this substance was organic. How had the cables been embedded into stone? It looked almost like they'd woven themselves in it, like worms through an apple that was otherwise undisturbed. He had been right. The oil was Fyrexian. He checked again. Could these fibers be ancient remnants? No, he muttered. These look recent. Fresh. Karn reached into the borehole and grabbed one of the fibers. It writhed under his fingers, resistant, and released a small, spider-like clamp from its body to grip the stone. The cable was alive. He frowned. It lashed his fingertips as if it was trying to wriggle free from his grip. He tugged and tore it free from its tunneled cavity. Black oil spattered around his torso from its root. The other cables contracted within the wall. The ceiling to the ancient workshop thundered to the ground. The tunnel behind Karn crumpled, and the passage to his base camp was gone. He had lost his findings. He would never locate the shard of the unfired tablet. He would never slot it in and see what it revealed. He would never fully investigate the chamber and determine if it housed other secrets about the Silex's creation. The recent development had seen to that. Now he had a more urgent problem, one he needed to prioritize over archaeological catastrophe. The Fyrexians were on Dominaria. Here. Now. He could try to excavate the workshop. He could dig out the passage and return to his base camp. He could reach out to the others, but seeking help took time. Karn knew and put others at risk. If he had learned anything during his long life, it was this. A single moment of inattention, of neglect, could leave an entire plane vulnerable to the Fyrexians. The Fyrexians were contained within the caves for now, and he with them. Good. He would not let Dominaria fall like Mirrodin once fell. He'd stop the Fyrexians. If he could not do that, he would obtain proof enough that he could recruit reinforcements. Proof enough that Joyra and his fellow planeswalkers would believe him. Karn, Joyra would say, you were right all along. Karn had only one direction he could go, forward. He stepped into the open Fyrexian tunnel. The walls looked organic, winding through the stone like veins through a body. He followed the tunnel until it opened into a junction. Here, the walls had been carved into a frieze. Until the materials he had seen in the workshop and embedded behind translucent stone, these cuts seemed crisp and new. It had the vaulted quality Karn associated with a religious practice, such as the stained glass murals in Sarah's temples. In the frieze, a Fyrexian demon grasped a young human woman. The demon's elongated skull, bare teeth, and small eyes were depicted with loving detail. Each node of machinery and every exposed muscle fiber was polished until it gleamed. Small diamonds had been inset as highlights so that the demon seemed to move and glitter under Karn's gaze. In contrast, the human's profile, cut into the stone, was rough, her features drawn down into torment, revulsion, and fear. She held hands with another finger whose visage had been carved, then intentionally defaced. Things are getting intense. I think maybe Elish Norn's been here? I don't know. We'll see. A whisper of cloth brushing stone drew Karn's attention. He turned, hands still pressed to the mural. Humans always seemed so little to Karn. Only the tallest neared his height. All others were petite compared to him. These two, a man and a woman, were both small. The woman, her pale skin starved for sunlight and her brown hair ragged, had replaced her jaw with a hinged mechanism. Small blades installed along her natural teeth. Where flesh joined metal, her scabs wept a sick, yellowish fluid. Ew. Her companion, an older white man with graying, brittle blonde hair, must have incorporated his technology more artfully. His white shirt lay open to expose the artificial heart beating between his ribs. The portal into his body protected with a glassy material. He also had added extra digits to his hands. Both held chisels and large mallets. The sculptors, then, acolytes from the Society of Mishra if their robes told him the truth. The female looked at Karn, then to his hand resting on the frieze, and shrieked in outrage. She launched herself forward. Her male companion followed her a second later. She took a swing at his torso with the hammer. Karn seized her arm with one hand, and she drove her chisel toward the intricate mobile plates along his abdomen. He grabbed her other arm. She grunted, strained against him. Her companion ran at Karn, raising his hammer over his shoulder. Karn swung the woman into her companion, slamming both into the wall. They fell in a tangle of limbs, nothing broken, just stunned to the ground. Karn bent over them and arranged their limbs. He held out his hands and generated restraints so they could not attack him again. Iron particles buzzed at his fingertips, drawn from aether. He called forth metal in layers, building the restraints into bands on their arms and legs. He did not generate keyholes or a key. He had no need to. The metal bands were solid. The man moaned. Ugh. The woman had enough fury to spit at Karn. The gob landed near his foot. They were so tiny. His strength, his reflexes, the fact of his body seemed an unfair advantage. Karn had told through so many such creatures at Urza's request, walking through rank upon rank of soldiers like a lead weight through wet paper. He could almost feel it now. The resistance, then give of those bodies, the heat of their blood trickling into his joints, the long hours he had spent while Urza slept cleaning his body with small wire brushes, scraping off the dried gore, digging out the clots from behind his knees. He had never felt clean enough. "You are not Fyrexian," Karn said. "Yet you are here, and if I am not mistaken, in service to them? What do you hope to accomplish?" Mystery character. You empty, fleshless husk. You desecrate our holy work with your touch. The female acolyte's rage dulled to a glittering self-satisfaction. Others will respond to the barrier being broken. Gix's blessing upon them. They will come. They will come. Ah, yes. The network of wires in the walls. When he had broken through them, he had likely triggered an alarm. Perhaps these first acolytes had responded as if some animal or natural event had severed the cables. But when these two did not report back, the others would not make such a mistake. Karn reached towards the female's face and, with a twist of his fingers, generated a metal gag. The only reason she hadn't shouted for help, sounds would carry in these caverns, was that it hadn't yet occurred to her. She glared at him, making muffled noises that sounded like curses. He leaned over the male acolyte. What are you doing here? The male blinked at Karn. His pupils had dilated to different sizes. He was concussed. His speech, as a result, slurred. Got a second mystery person here. Use this hat for the man. Karn, I know it's you. It's good that you came. Karn frowned. The Whispering One has a plan for you, the acolyte beamed. She grows stronger daily, and you will serve her. Shieldred welcomes you. It's your destiny, Karn, to create for us, to help us, to become one of us. Karn generated another gag so that this one, when he regained his senses, could not call for help. The acolyte accepted the gag, almost as if he appreciated it, with a beatific smile. Karn stepped away. How had Shieldred survived crossing between planes? A question he would ponder late. For now, he had to find her, to end the Fyrexian invasion before it started. And he could do that alone. Better that he did, for he could not be subverted. Venser's spark saved him from that. Karn left the acolytes bound and gagged and plunged deeper into the cave network. The damp in these passages did not feel like the air around his camp, but rather warm as breath. Hot, moist air condensed on his cold body, trickling down in rivulets like sweat. Faint screams reverberated through the air. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, which echoed with the cacophony of human misery. On the other side of the crevasse was the Fyrexian staging ground, located on a broad, flat area of the cavern floor. Ant-like workers scrambled across the rope bridges strung over the crevasse, ferrying meaty gobs, bloody cables, and chunks of flesh over to human beings completed on surgical tables. Humans being completed on surgical tables. Humans completed, you know. Oh. On the opposite wall of the cavern, a Fyrexian portal ship cut through the darkness like an immense scythe. Coils hung from this structure. The twitching loops, membranous purple gleam, reminded Karn of intestines. Yeah. Shieldred hung suspended in this morass. She was still. Tubes fed reddish and milky substances into her black, segmented body. The mandibles that extended down from her thorax lay open, relaxed. Her humanoid torso, welded into the thorax's top, lay nested into a thick network of writhing, inky lines. A horned mask obscured her face. Beneath her, worshippers clung together and raised their voices in an ecstatic pain. The defunct Fyrexian portal ship and Shieldred's sleeping form dominated the cavern. Acolytes in gray robes of the Society of Mishra attended surgical machines that converted struggling people into Fyrexian abominations. Completed monstrosities dotted the cavern's floor like grotesque artworks skittering on too many limbs. Many acolytes stacked weapons beside a Fyrexian skyship. Teams of splicers scaled a dragon engine to repair it, so small that their welding torches seemed like white stars against the engine's metal skeleton. He found the staging ground of the Fyrexian invasion. A single figure attended Shieldred, a young woman with platinum brown skin and dark umber curls who wore the cloak of the Tolarian Academy. When she turned, Karn saw the red dot from a mechanical eye. Below, an acolyte hurried forward and offered up goblets of flesh. The young woman sorted through them, twisting some into the morass that supported Shieldred. Karn traced the line of acolytes carrying materials from the immense monstrosity to Shieldred and her helper. She was mining the monstrosity to repair Shieldred's damaged biological components. If the other planeswalkers could see this now, they'd know Karn's fears were true. Joyra would say, no, it didn't matter what Joyra would say. Karn faced this threat alone. He needed to alert the others, yes, but neither could he leave this staging ground intact. He had to destroy the Fyrexians before they could defend themselves. His course of action decided, Karn held out his hand, palm up, raised out above. He visualized the incendiary device he planned to generate from the inside out. He could see its every component, its chemicals, laid out like a dimensional blueprint. His fingertips buzzed with the magic of his creation. The layers of material accumulated in midair. It was no Silex, but it would end Shieldred. A klaxon filled the cavern with its high-pitched holler. Karn located its source as acolytes, worshippers, and Fyrexian agents paused in their work. The female acolyte who'd attacked him was blowing a horn. Either she'd been discovered and freed, or she'd freed herself, the drawback to leaving his attackers alive. The shrill sound prompted action. Acolytes loaded weapons into the skyships. Fyrexian surgeons loaded their bodied operating tables into skyships. Others boarded the skyships, evacuating. Completed Fyrexian monstrosities shuddered to life, metal fibers snaking out from their bodies. Others slumped to the floor. Claw-like limbs exploded from their abdomens, and their gaping mouths opened blindly like reptiles scenting for prey. A red beam dotted Karn's chest. Karn dropped flat to the rock just as a bolt of electricity flew overhead. He pressed his palms to the ground, lifting himself high enough to crawl forward. At the cliff's edge, he peered to the cavern floor, trying to locate the blast's origin. The Tolarian who aided Shieldred leveled a glaive at him. She had replaced her eye with a miniaturized ray cannon, and its red beam hit Karn. Karn rolled to the side. A crackle exploded to the rock beside him. Smoke wisped up from where he'd once lain. Completed Fyrexians swarmed toward him, and the Tolarian smiled. She placed a hand on Shieldred's limp claw. Shieldred's remained limp, inert, as if she were under sedation while the young woman worked to restore her, and vulnerable. And Karn still held his incendiary device. The nearest bridge over to Shieldred was close but narrow. 12 ecstatic worshippers and the young woman with the glaive blocked his access to the Praetor. But Shieldred seemed some distance from the Fyrexians and Tolarian acolytes located on the cavern floor. If Karn was quick, he would not have to battle through all of Shieldred's followers to attack her, just the 12 worshippers and the Tolarian making it 13. Karn pushed himself to his feet and charged down the narrow stone bridge. Shieldred's worshippers ceased their paean and launched themselves toward him. 2 reached the bridge. Karn's shouldered and them aside into the crevice's abyss. He shouldered them just like a football move, just like ah! In case you needed a visual. The other worshippers crowded themselves into a blockade. Two had leveled spears at him, which would have kept him at bay had he been a creature with flesh. Puncturing weapons annoyed him only if the shafts or blades became trapped in his joints and inhibited his range of motion. Similarly, the two young men with rotating saws did not give him pause. Those blades would glance from his body. No, Karn focused on the worshippers who wielded the pistol chisels and wielding torches. Welcome, Rob. We're in chapter 1. It all came back to him so easily. He felt numb, efficient, as Urza made him. Karn stopped an inch away from spear points. The worshippers shifted uneasy. Karn took one step forward, seized a spear, and lifted. A worshipper, still clinging to his weapon, gaped and dangled. Karn swung him into foes, sweeping several off the bridge and breaking up their blockade. Then he tossed the spear wielder into the crevasse's depths, the man's screams fading as he fell. The other spear wielder, an older woman, jammed her spear point into a gap in his torso. Although he held an incendiary device, he cracked the spear shaft by hammering his fist down, breaking it off inside of himself. He'd deal with that later. He grabbed the broken shaft end, which she still held, and used it to swing her aside. She fell and crumpled. Only 6 combatants remained. The wielder of a rotating saw swung their bizzing instrument at Karn's head. Karn stepped back to evade. Before the saw could come around again, he stepped within the wielder's range and removed the tool from the man's fingers. The man tried to resist, but Karn had overwhelmingly strength on his side. Prying away the man's grip was disturbingly easy. Karn lifted him and tossed him into 2 more worshippers. The force crunched all 3 to the floor in a sickening confusion of broken limbs. Ugh. A pistol chisel wielder rushed him from the side. A chisel thunked into Karn, then skidded down his arm, throwing its user off balance. Karn punched him. The man went flying. The 2 remaining worshippers fled. Their faith was not so great in the face of such bodily harm. All these humans, even with the Fyrexian alterations, were no sturdier to him than butterflies. Karn wished it were not so easy. He strode to Shieldred. She hung, limp within her cradle, but no longer quiescent. Her segmented limbs twitched like an arachnid's as she emerged into consciousness. Her human torso atop her thorax shivered. Her long fingers reached downward to the young woman in the Tolarian robes, but she did not seem aware. Not yet. Karn, I've heard a lot about you. How so? Her gaze flicked back to Shieldred. She hung. Oh, then returned to him. You aren't as impressive as I've been led to believe. Karn walked toward Shieldred, the incendiary device in hand. Who are you? Karn asked the Tolarian. Why would you bring this here? Rona. And this, she gestured to Shieldred, is Dominaria's salvation. Rona positioned herself between Karn and Shieldred, glaive held easily at an angle in her palms. Rona's flesh eye narrowed while her mechanical socket focused its laser onto Karn's torso. She flexed her hands around her glaive. Its blade brightened, crackling with blue electricity. She smiled. I do not wish to fight you. Oh, I do not wish to fight you. Welcome, Scott. Thanks for joining here. I need another hat for the chick. Ooh, how about this? Since she has a Fyrexian eye. This is Rona. So, I do not wish to fight you. Too bad. Rona levered her glaive at him, and electricity burst from her blade. The electricity danced across his body, sparking. Karn grimaced at the pain but pushed through it, walking toward her as more waves rippled from its blade, pouring over him. Karn paused, dazed, and tried to shake off the agony as Rona continued to attack. She swung the glaive down, lodging it into his shoulder. Karn twisted, pulling it from her grip, and removed it from his body. He threw it aside. While he was occupied, Rona unsheathed a dagger and jammed it into one of his abdominal seams. She dug it between the plates and allowed him to flex, as if searching for organs. Karn winced. Karn gripped her head in one of his hands. He pressed his thumb into the mechanical eye and shattered the lace lenses. Rona shrieked and kicked. Karn tossed her into the wall. Bones crunched. She slammed into it, then fell to the ground. She curled her hands around her head, her leg at an angle unnatural to human beings. Oil and blood oozed from the broken mechanical parts in her eye socket. She glared up at him from between her fingers, her lips drawn into a rictus. "Why don't you kill me?" Rona taunted him. "Finish me off." "I am not a weapon." Karn neared Shieldred, holding his incendiary device. Although her humanoid part was the size of an ordinary woman, she attached to a scorpion-like body easily 3 times his size. In contrast to that well-crafted beauty, the organic materials grafted into her human torso seemed crude, bloody. Rona had tried her best to replace the organic parts that had burned away in the blind eternities during Shieldred's transit between planes, but its patchwork nature showed. He would tear her to pieces. He would crush her while she was still weak. He would do anything to stop Shieldred from Fyrexianizing this plane. Karn reached up and seized Shieldred's torso. Determined to finish this, he would tuck the device between the vulnerable plates of her body and destroy her. At his touch, Shieldred stirred. Her helmeted head craned down toward him. He could feel her with the same senses he used to determine the elemental composition of a compound. Her inorganic components stretched out before him like pages in a book. Her biological parts lay like dark tumors nested within the metal's luminescent glory. He could read her thoughts, some of them. I'm glad you like this entertaining. I need a hat for Shieldred. I think I'm going to use my Nylea hat because it's a helmet. Okay. Here we go.
"Welcome, Father,"
Shieldred whispered into his mind, one mechanical being to another.
"What plans I have for you."
Karn recoiled from her slimy whisper, stepping back as he knew what she had done. Fyrexian sleeper agents lurked into every land in Dominaria. These unknowing spies peppered throughout every government, throughout the military, throughout common people. He saw a brewer dumping hopes into a vat, a spy. He saw a scribe sitting at a desk, her hand poised over a letter. He saw an adolescent playing chase with his cousins, pretending to be a monster when he was one. Fyrexian armature ready to explode from his back. Fyrexian agents were people's lovers, comrades, colleagues at work. They were everywhere. They could be anyone. Probably me. You know, just saying.
Welcome.
Her whisper echoed within him.
Welcome.
Karn reached between the plates on her thorax and deposited the incendiary device inside her body. He lifted his thumb to flip the switch that would allow the two chemicals within it to flow into each other and combust. But his hand did not move. His joints had locked. He attempted to look down and examine himself, but even his neck remained rigid. He tried to turn and couldn't move his arms, legs, or torso. He couldn't tell whether he'd been paralyzed or locked into place. In his peripheral vision, he could see Rona dragging herself, shattered lens, broken legs, and all, toward unfamiliar magical devices. One she must have created herself. She left a trail of oil, blood, and fluorescent blue fluid behind her. Karn strained against the strange magic that gripped him. Rona levered herself up into a seated position. From her grunts, it sounded agonizing. Your mistake, she said, was not killing me when you had the chance. We have expected your coming, Karn. We have prepared. He tried again to move, his internal mechanisms groaning with the effort. He felt his metal torque. He would bend, break before he freed himself from Rona's magical through force. Rona sorted through the heaped parts she'd been using to repair children. She lifted up a node and smiled and set it aside. With a grimace, she dug her fingers into her damaged eye socket and yanked out the ruined node, exposing raw tissue and a piece of gleaming skull near her eyebrow. A gout of clear liquid spurted out. She clicked the new node into place. Roars boomed through the cavern. Rocks sifted down, pinging against Karn's body. That, Rona said, was the sound of our ships evacuating our forces from this staging area, which has been compromised, and retreating to a secondary staging area. We have many bases across Dominaria. You will not find them all. Rona drove her glaive into her leg. She grunted, slicing through her clothing and her flesh. Her eyes teared. Even the eye she replaced dripped. Panting, she bared her muscle and her broken bone to the cavern's air. Karn had failed. Held with Rona's magic, he would be unable to warn his friends, unable to fight at their sides, unable to save them when the completed Fyrexian agents exploded from their dearest companions to kill them. Why did my camera change so suddenly, though? Was it always like that? When did it get like that, though? Oh, this is Lappy Toppy. Hey. Haha. The cavern had emptied and quieted enough that Karn could hear the click as Rona slid a device into her leg. She sighed and folded her flesh over the metal. She fixed another panel over her thigh, sealing her wound shut, and then stood. She rolled her shoulders and smiled. Shieldred, in her beauty, my whispering one, Rona said, grows stronger day by day, and she will lead us to victory. Karn, still arm deep in Shieldred's torso, could feel clicking vibrate along his body. Shieldred split apart, dividing herself up in pieces. Her segments broke away, each piece sprouting a dozen Viridian segmented legs. The swarm poured over Karn, using him as a bridge to the floor. The spider-like creatures ran along Karn's arms, down his back and torso, the back of his knees and his calves. The tink, tink, tink of their metal claws reverberated through him. A tarantula-sized piece sprang free from the cables onto Karn's face. It clung to his head, twitching like a heart nugget of flesh grafted onto the center of its modified thorax. It crawled over his head. He could feel its wet body slither down his back. It dropped to the floor and scampered away. I may not be able to stop you, Urza's creation, Rona said, but I can prevent you from stopping us. From the edge of his vision, Karn could see Rona limp down the tunnel. Even with her makeshift repairs, Rona remained heavily damaged, and she leaned on her glaive, using it as a cane. Her leg spurted yellow fluid, and she staggered. She paused to catch her breath. Oil dribbled from her new inserts, mingled with her blood. Gross. He turned his head to watch her. The field paralyzing Karn had weakened. Perhaps it was due to Rona's retreat. Did she carry the device with her that held him in place? Karn attempted to raise his arm. The effort shuddered through him. He lifted one finger. Rona let her shoulder rest against the tunnel wall. She used her glaive to cut free a strip of cloth from her mantle. I hope that as we take this plane... we use it more perfect. You feel the keenness of failure once again. Karn strained against the force gripping him. His jaw ached. What? Rona bound the cloth strip around her leaking leg in a tourniquet. As you watch the people you've known for eons transform and turn against you, I hope it hurts. Why would you say that? Karn managed. He had to keep her talking. If he could break free... No. What have I done to you that would wish such horror upon me? When the Mirrans became Fyrexians, Rona said, it was the best thing that ever happened. To them, they were independent from their creator, unified, beautiful. The force holding Karn seemed to loosen. He needed to push free, even with the Fyrexian staging ground in the caves of Koilos empty. If Karn could capture Rona as Shieldred's right hand, she would be able to provide valuable information. All was not yet lost. You'd kill them, wouldn't you? Rona said, for reaching perfection. He only needed one moment. You gave Memnarch your intelligence, your capabilities, but he didn't have the experience to deal with it. The guidance. He was so lost. Rona's smile twisted. She enjoyed his struggle. I can't stand bad parents. Karn stopped. His body couldn't have reverberated more if she had struck him. Rona flipped a switch on the wall. There was a small grating noise, then a series of booms overhead. The roar as the cavern fell engulfed him. Tons of rock poured onto him. A boulder rolled off of the cavern's walls, then bounced onto his chest. It tossed him onto his back. He stared up at the collapsing cavern, still paralyzed by Rona's device. Rocks sheeted down, fist-sized pieces hammered into his body. Small pebbles thunked and plinked against him, rolling and filling in the gaps. His vision turned gray from the dust and then blackened out as the stone obscured all light. The rock weighed upon him. He could feel Rona's spell ease. He could move, or at least beneath all the stone, he could attempt to move, to twitch a finger, for whatever good it did him. Not even could he lift this stone. Not even could he dig his way out from this cave-in. The crushing layer of rock was too heavy even for him to shift. Karn reached for the spark that allowed him to planeswalk. It burned within him, hot and bright, such a perpetual companion that he had ceased to notice it. If he could just focus and... It didn't work. Nothing happened. Karn reached out with his special senses through his fingertip and analyzed the surroundings. Inorganic materials, olivine, granite, quartz, mica, ordinary stone, but with all of the ancient interplanar and Fyrexian technology providing a low-grade interference, he could not planeswalk away. He was trapped. He only knew that Shieldred had come to Dominaria, and he could warn no one. Hello, Jake and Joel. Thank you so much for the raid. Chef Byers. That is it for chapter 1. Thank you everyone who is here with me. Woohoo! I'm excited to have you all on my YouTube and my Twitch. Before we get on to the second chapter, I want you to know that I am producing a Magic the Gathering game show. It is currently being written. The first episode will be filmed soon. So make sure you're following me or subscribed. Hit all those buttons on whatever platform you're watching me on. And thank you so much for being here tonight. You are fabulous. What do we think so far? Oh my goodness. Here, let's take a quick little intermission here. Oh, I forgot. I don't know what's going on with this. What the fuck? I moved everything and it's all referencing stuff. Let's not. See, I feel like the world's all upside down with the Fyrexians. So that was perfect, right? A little upside down time. It's Friday night. Did anybody play Magic tonight? You don't have to play Magic tonight. You can continue listening to the Dominaria United story with me. Hello, everyone who joined from the raid or is just popping in and seeing the break in Chapter 1. We are moving on to Chapter 2. I am ZBexx. I'm a professional cosplayer and Magic the Gathering personality, and I am very excited to be narrating and reading the story aloud for you. And this is my first time reading through. Let's go to Chapter 2. What did I post in the Discord? I posted that I was going to read this. That's what I posted. Episode 2. We'll reset our characters. If Shieldred comes back, we'll use my Nylea hat. If Rona's back, we'll use her princess hat. If Joyra's back, we'll use this. The acolytes are dead, so we can reset that. I have some other props and such, but I kind of liked that for the characters. No, I didn't see what you posted. Sorry, I did not. Excuse me. Okay. Any guesses what our second chapter is going to be on? Sand in the Hourglass. I feel like we need to hear someone else's story because Karn is like trapped. Like, gosh. Okay. Got all that out of me. Oh, you got offered a job? Congrats. All right. Probably some 1/1s. Like Thopters or 1/1 Fyrexians. Okay, here we go. Episode 2, Sand in the Hourglass. Time trickled away more slowly than the grains of sand settling between the rocks. The fine particles sifted into Karn's joints. He didn't know how long he had lain there, pinned in the dark. Was it days or weeks that had passed? What if months had flown away, like a small, startled bird? What if it was longer? Years, decades, eons? No, he could not think of it. No one would miss him. No one would know where he had gone. He should have told someone. He should have at least told Joyra or Jaya. If he had told them, they would have known where to search and either freed him or seen the Fyrexians themselves. What if the Fyrexians were the ones to find him? Would it be worse if no one found him? He might wait alone, forever in the darkness, in the silence. Sand trickled down. A scrabbling noise. Maybe claws grating on a rough stone. A weight lifted away from his hand, exposing it to the chill air currents. He could move his fingers. Relief shot through him, a pang more powerful than the blind eternities. He stretched his fingers, marveling at the freedom of the small movement, the ability to make any movement. Something warm and soft touched his fingertips. Organic, impenetrable to his senses. Not Fyrexian. Gentle. Thoughtful. He was found. The warmth left his fingertips. Had his rescuer departed? The scratching quickened. Rocks grated, pebbles cascaded, clunks as large as rocks tossed away landed. The burden on him lightened. Karn strained. The material around him budged, shifting at the pressure on his enormous strength. Karn exercised the powerful mechanisms in his torso, pushing himself upright. Rocks poured away. He heaved himself up slowly. He wanted to take care not to hurt his rescuer with any stray stones. As his efforts increased, the scratching noises ended. Footfalls retreated as his rescuer stepped clear. Karn would have to trust that they had moved to a safe distance. Karn hauled himself to his feet. Storm pulled off him. Stone, even. He was free. The warm air caressed his body. He rolled his shoulders, reveling in their movement. The tumbling rock kicked up a gray haze. He shook the fine particles from his body and wiped clean his eyes. A Johnny stood in the tunnel, his fur a striking white in the torchlight. The pupil of his unscarred pale blue eye glinted with the nocturnal hue of a nighttime predator. His shoulders had a proud sense to him. Like he was pleased he'd found Karn. He granted Karn a friendly, close-lipped smile. Karn nodded, tentative. He'd only met a Johnny a few times. For a Johnny's species, baring teeth was a hostile action, so this small smile was friendlier than a broad human grin. "How did you find me?" Karn cleared his throat. It too felt dusty. The mechanism inside it clicked uncomfortably. "I told no one I was here." A Johnny coughed, awkward, deep in his chest. "I need cat ears. I should have cat ears somewhere. Hang on. I think. Hang on one moment. I promise. This will be good. Okay. They're a little hard to see from that angle, but you can totally see them from this one. That's all that matters. A Johnny coughed, awkward jeep in his chest. What does a cat sound like? Does he have a big booming voice? A thundercat voice? No, I can't do it. Maybe he's from down under. Johnny, cats down under? That makes sense, right? After you didn't answer the letters, Joyra became worried about you. She asked Raph to place a trafficking spell on those letters, one that would only activate you and only you when you opened the envelope. That's how I located your camp. Karn stilled, embarrassed. Had Joyra known every time he'd read a letter and left it unanswered? Every time he'd pushed aside the paper heaps on his worktop to make more room for a new project? Had a Johnny seen the chaotic clutter that had populated his workspace? Karn would have never let his camp descend to such a state if he'd expected a visitor. He evaded a Johnny's gaze and investigated the joints in his body for damage. Ah, the spearhead. He'd forgotten he'd left that lodged in him. Every time you moved the letters, Joyra knew you were alive, Johnny said, and didn't want to talk. She was determined to give you the time you needed and not press you. She knows how private you can be when you are upset. Sorry, Down Under doesn't patch him. Give me a better Johnny voice suggestion then. Karn worked at the spearhead, trying to remove it from his body. The rockfall had jammed it even deeper into him. But when you stopped shuffling the letters around, Johnny continued, she grew concerned, and here I am. Karn grunted. He wiggled the spearhead back and forth, trying to loosen it from between his torso plates. His blunt fingers, though capable of the most detailed work, couldn't dig deep enough. He still couldn't believe Joyra had known how often he'd looked at those letters, considering replying, and then set them aside too many times. Joyra is well? She's in our workshop on the Mana Rig. Johnny shrugged. And the weather light? All good. Shauna will rise to the task. Oh, sorry, that's let me go. African. How do you speak with an African accent? I haven't looked into that, to be honest. Without being like culturally inappropriate. Well, I guess none of my accents are culturally appropriate, but you know. Let me go rewind. And the weather light? Oi, she returned the weather light to its rightful owner, Johnny said. Shauna captains it. Ah, good. Shauna will rise to the task. Karn had served with Sisay and was pleased to see the airship in her descendants' hands. Do you mind if Johnny nodded at the spear point. Karn shrugged. Johnny was not as tall as Karn, but he was tall enough that he had to bend his head to inspect the spearhead. He inserted his claws into Karn's joints with surprising delicacy. You know, every planeswalker goes through phases like this. Oh. You know, mate, every planeswalker goes through phases like this. We withdraw, especially if we played a role in changing a plane's fate. I've seen it time and time again. After a great hunt, you feast and you sleep. It's natural. There's no shame in that. I do not feast, and I do not sleep, Karn said. That doesn't mean you don't need to recuperate. Johnny eased the spearhead from Karn's body. Karn had never been permitted to recuperate when Urza had loosed him as a war machine. Urza had explained it was unnecessary and, indifferent to Karn's wariness, had turned his attention to other, more interesting projects. Johnny examined the spear point. Its metal glimmered a sickly green in the dimness. You encountered more than a rockfall. What happened here, mate? Changing it to mate instead of my friend. Karn didn't wish to answer the question, not until he knew whether he could trust a Johnny. The vision he'd had upon touching Shieldred still thrummed within him. Fyrexian agents everywhere, hidden across Dominaria, waiting. How long have I been buried? A few months, a Johnny admitted. It took time to locate you. Months lost. Months that could have been spent preparing. Shieldred's segmented parts had skittered along his paralyzed arms, down his back, spider-like. They had poured over him. She would have ample time to reassemble herself. Rona as well, he was sure. You have damaged yourself. Karn nodded at a Johnny. Oh, that's Karn. Psh. You have damaged yourself. Karn nodded at a Johnny whose claw had torn at the cuticle, a wound that had most likely occurred when he had dug Karn out from the rock slide. Let us return to my camp for supplies. I must also check the sensitive equipment there to verify that it's still functional. Karn did not voice that he feared most. Did he still have the Silex and the clay tablet? In the months Karn had been buried, his campsite remained undisturbed but not unchanged. The small tents had gone dingy with mildew. A Johnny hunched his shoulders. He had a planeswalker's distaste for these caves. Even if one could not directly sense the interplanar technologies, their way of warping time made this space claustrophobic. Karn, too, could feel the pressure. Karn led a Johnny through his cluttered camp, then ducked into his main tent. The box holding the Silex and the tablet remained where he'd left it and appeared to be locked. Karn ignored it, conscious of a Johnny's eyes on him. Karn located a barrel with water, potable, though he normally used it for cleaning purposes, and a rag. He handed the rag to a Johnny to wash and wrap his wound. Why are you here, Karn? A Johnny rinsed his hand, working out the grit that had lodged in his wound. Karn inventoried his equipment for damage as he replied, searching for artifacts. Due to unique properties of the caves of Koilos, not even the most entrepreneurial archaeologists or enthusiastic researchers have plundered them. He made his way in a circuit around the tent, toward the box where he'd hidden the Silex and its tablet. Casually. The box seemed intact, but he dared not open it. He reached out with his special senses. The tablet felt like mere clay, a combination of aluminum, silicone, magnesium, sodium, and other trace elements. The Silex buzzed at him, present but not indecipherable due to its powerful magic. Karn set the box aside. He faced a Johnny and related all he'd seen. Shieldred escaped? A Johnny paced in the tent's confines. Karn, we must warn. I tried, Karn said, many times. Now you have seen Shieldred. Karn wished he could trust a Johnny, but he shook his head. The caves where I discovered the Fyrexian staging ground are no longer accessible. I have no proof that the Fyrexians have returned to Dominaria. Don't we? A Johnny held out the spearhead. Karn, this is a peace summit between the Keldons and the Benalish. If any nations will take the Fyrexians' return seriously, it's these two. I propose we speak to their leaders. A Johnny was right. Of all the nations of Dominaria, Keld and New Benalia were likeliest to listen to Karn's warning. Rada, the leader of the Keldons, had reforged that rugged nation of warriors into a devastating military force. Aaron Capuchin led New Benalia's knights, whose passion for justice made each one worth a dozen fighters. Let me gather my finds and sensitive equipment before we go. A Johnny tapped an amulet hanging from his bell. Joyra? Joyra gave me a summoning device for the weatherlight before she sent me. Shauna will honor it. The weatherlight may be a speedy ship. Oh my gosh, what's going on? I'm losing it, y'all. The weatherlight may be a speedy ship, but she is not quick enough. Karn stacked several devices on the chest that held the Silex and the tablet and loaded everything into a rucksack. I propose that we planeswalk. Karn did not know how the other planeswalkers perceived the blind eternities, but to him, the interminable space felt like crushed velvet, its lukewarm prickles sometimes verging on pain. The vertigo plunging through Karn contrasted with the sense that he wasn't moving at all, which was at odds with the feeling that he pulled himself along a cord to an unknown destination. He burst through a silken gash into cool air. Karn stood knee-deep in wild grasses, orange poppies, and purple flowering thistles. Inland, farms seemed young, recently cleared land holding fields, yellow with blooming canola. The homesteads bled into mountains, the misty temperate rainforest punctuated with emerald alpine meadows. If he had been human, he would have taken a shingle, shuddering breath. To his other side, a large stone statue protected a seaport whose buildings and streets were carved into chalk cliffs. Eons ago, a Fyrexian portal ship must have decapitated the statue, and the decrepit hulk lay atop the statue's neck. Overgrown with honeysuckle, it shadowed the city's colorful awnings. In the center of the bay, a worn, smooth island protruded from the water, the statue's head now home to the seabirds. A Johnny led Karn down narrow paths past modest homes carved into the chalk. These seemed small and well-worn in contrast to the newly sculpted clay hall, which had large but chunky dimensions, wide windows and balconies framed with ornate columns. Do you know where the peace talks are occurring? Karn asked. A Johnny paused and cocked his head. Follow the sound of arguing, I suppose. Karn could hear nothing. The Leonine senses had to be spectacular. A Johnny led Karn through a grand but empty reception area, then up a narrow set of stairs. The corridors linking the rooms felt claustrophobic, lit only by torches. They pushed between brass-bound double doors into a light-filled room dominated by a long granite table. A broad balcony overlooked the sea, and a male-varied thrush, orange beast with a black collar, black mask, and black cap, a beautiful creature, perched on its railing. To one side sat the representative of House Capuchin of Benalia. The nobleman at the table, Aaron Capuchin, a middle-aged man with light ochre skin, had a proud tower with 7 colored windows embroidered onto his silks. The knights arrayed behind him, their silver armor chased with gold, their stained glass shields held at the ready, possessed the same gilded motif on their breastplates. To the other side lounged the large, gray-skinned Keldon warriors with their heavy leather armor and their heavier weapons. Their warlord, Rada, sat opposite the Capuchin nobleman. She had Keldon's ash-colored skin, black mane, and bulky muscles, but the pointed ears and blue markings of a Skyshroud elf. Other officials led a man from New Argive who had fair skin and a black goatee, lined the sides of granite negotiation table between the two conflicting parties. A Johnny and Karn must have had arrived as the negotiations were set to begin, because only a moment later, both Jada and Jaya arrived. Joda portaled in, stepping through a door, and his magic sliced through air. Jaya planeswalked into the room, appearing with a flash and the smell of charcoal. It's been a while. Oh. I got some goggles. For Jaya. Oh, these totally snap, so these better not snap on me. They hurt when they snap on the bridge of your nose. Anyway, so laugh if it happens, because it's gonna hurt me. Okay. Jay is old now, right? So let's get a little grandma voice on.
It's been a while, old man.
Jaya gave Joda a friendly embrace. With his boyish features and shaggy brunette hair, Joda could have been Jaya's grandson, even though he was thousands of years her senior. Joda's a wizard. What do I have that's really wizardy? I don't have anything that wizardy in here. Oh, this sparkly mask is gonna be like a hat, like a sparkly wizard's hat. Just roll with it with me, okay? It works. Like it's like a yarmulke wizard hat. Just don't worry about it. So Jaya just said, "It's been a while, old man. Come for the family silver?"
Oh, there's nothing silver here that I like enough to keep, except for my hair. I've already checked your pockets. Thought about taking up lint farming.
Joda smiled. "I'm not worried. Your tongue is quicker than your fingertips." Jaya's gaze fell upon Karn and Ajani.
Well, that's a surprise. Are you two here to work on the negotiations as well?
Ajani regarded Jaya solemn. "We must speak to you regarding what Karn has seen in the caves of Koilos." Well, I don't know where the accent went. "The Fyrexians have returned to Dominaria." The idle small talk at the negotiation table dropped into shocked silence. Joda and Jaya exchanged looks, then turned their attention to Karn. The Keldans, Benelish, and Argivians broke into argument. The overlapping dialects and accents turned their fears into babble. Only the Benelish knights remained at their post, their rigid posture a testament to their discipline. Jaya had paled.
It seems hardly possible.
This is hilarious. I'm gonna get better at this, fam. "I have walked this plain for millennia," Joda said, "and I have read the stories, examined the histories. I have visited the ruins. I tell you this not to boast, but so that you know I speak the truth. The Fyrexians cannot traverse the blind eternities." "Shieldred has traveled between the planes," Karn said. "Only planeswalkers can do that now." Joda pinched the bridge of his nose. "If I recall, Karn, that is what reality you helped usher in." His age, similar to Urza's when Urza had created Karn, overwrote his young features with exhaustion. Karn could not believe Joda would deny the truth, not when Karn had seen Shieldred. Perhaps most Fyrexians could not survive the journey through the blind eternities, but Shieldred had, even if it had burned away her organic materials, even if it had damaged and weakened her. She somehow had succeeded. Aaron Capuchin stood and he paced. He seemed agitated. "The Fyrexians are ancient history. I cannot see what you would have to gain by asserting this." "I located a staging ground for a new invasion," Karn said, "led by one of New Phyrexia's leader, a praetor named Shieldred. The Society of Mishra serves her, and the Fyrexians are completing dozens of ordinary citizens. We cannot know how many Fyrexians are stationed throughout Dominaria's nations. They may even be among us now." Have I not been warning you of this? The young nobleman from New Argive stood. Based on his gold-embroidered and four-lined finery, he had to be an important official. Fyrexian sleeper agents will permeate every layer of society if we do not act now, for we all know they already have. Sten, your alarmist tendencies are not... Oh. Sten, your alarmist tendencies are not helping, Joda said. Karn, where are the Fyrexians now? The varied thrush fixed a beady eye on him as if curious about his answer. Karn did not have an answer. They evacuated while I was incapacitated. I do not know. Joda sighed. The diplomatic situation is too sensitive to halt negotiations now. If you knew where they were, this would be a different matter. But without stronger information, like a location, how could we act to root them out?
And even if the Fyrexians were on Dominaria, Jaya said, historically, they've divided before they've conquered. And if we leave this conflict between Benalia and Keldons unresolved, we'd play right into their hands.
The thrush hopped along the railing. Karn, are you listening to me? Joda asked. Karn returned his attention to Joda. He placed the spearhead on the table. Y'all, I'm dead. Karn returned his attention to Joda. He placed the spearhead on the table. I have seen the weapons from the Society of Mishra before, Joda said, mild.
When has Karn ever lied, mate? Johnny growled. If he says he saw Shieldred completing people, then we are in danger.
I believe you, Aaron said, but I cannot send my soldiers chasing whispers and rumors across Dominaria. Between the hostilities with the Keldons and fighting off the Cabal's resurgence, I don't have fighters. Ooh, Rada, we've got to use some gruel stuff here. Ha! His troops have the same engagements as mine. Rada laughed a short bark. I suppose we have found common ground in that. Joda glanced between Rada and Aaron. The Fyrexians haven't been a threat for centuries. I know that your memory is long, Karn. If we address today's issue, the conflict between the Capuchins and the Keldons, we can discuss the redeploying the same soldiers to fight the Fyrexians. So many people screamed in Shieldred's lair, the voices thin and their pain sharp beneath the ecstatic orisons to her glory. What of the lives Shieldred takes now? Joda placed his hand on Karn's shoulder. We may not be talking about something as grand as an interplanar invasion, but lives are being lost to this conflict. They matter too.
We will go with you, said Jaya. We will search for them. But now, let us focus on the task at hand.
Karn could feel the room's attention swing back to the table and the negotiations. The thrush flew away.
Sten, Jaya said, have someone show Karn and Ajani to the guest quarters.
Karn's room was simple, its furniture basic but well crafted. A bed, a large table with 2 chairs, and a washstand with a porcelain basin in it. Karn pushed the bed to one side and moved the table into the room's center. He unloaded his backpack, taking care to ensure the Silex, still in its case, was secure. The most coherent argument Joda and Jaya had against assisting us, Karn said, was that we do not know where the Fyrexians are. If we can determine their location, then we will be able to persuade Joda and Jaya to help. Oops, where's my cat ears? And perhaps the others as well. Ajani paused, his powerful body coiled. How? A scrying device. Karn lifted his hand above the tabletop. He generated first the viewing plane, a copper sheet covered in crystal. He filled the narrow layer between the two materials with liquid. The device's remainder, a complex assemblage of mechanical parts, required his concentration. His body buzzed with the magic coursing through him. Ajani watched him, the pale blue of his unscarred eye attentive. What is that? It's for viewing remote locations. Karn let pride seep into his voice. He'd developed the plan for it himself, and he knew of no other device that could perform similarly. Karn focused in on Joyra, not on her face, not on her physical presence, but on her essence, the qualities that made her Joyra. How she always saw through a person's circumstance to their essence. How she was willing to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. The mana rig resolved within the crystal. At first, fuzzy, the image filled with depth, then color. Perched upon a cliff's edge, in Shiv's brutal desert, the metal structure had the size and complexity of a small city. The image tightened into a single location, a workshop with Joyra in it. She sat at a workbench, her head bent, bronzed hair bound and falling between her shoulder blades. She flipped a disconnected toggle back and forth, as if thinking. Can you view Shieldred? Ajani asked. All too easily, Karn visualized Shieldred, her humanoid torso ripping up from her scorpion-like body, her voice intimate and resonant inside his head.
Karn, such plans.
The scryer's image dissolved into mistiness. Karn leaned back on his heels. Ajani glanced at Karn. They must have protections in place to prevent us from scrying on them. A sensible precaution, unfortunately. Ajani pulled the amulet from his belt that could summon the weatherlight. He placed it in Karn's hand. You'll need this. Karn examined the amulet. It seemed a straightforward device. I can twin this. Ajani smiled, his lips closed. Even better. Karn extended his senses into the amulet. He reproduced it, the metalling coiling from his fingertips to form an identical amulet. Ajani clipped the original to his belt while Karn manufactured a chain for his copy. Karn hung the amulet from his neck, feeling odd about the adornment. Normally, he eschewed such things. A varied thrush perched on Karn's windowsill behind Ajani's shoulder. If Karn could draw the Fyrexians out, he would not need to find them. He'd know where they were. The Fyrexians wanted to neutralize Dominaria's most powerful weapons, and that included the Silex. He would use news of its presence to lure them into the open. But first, he had to hide the Silex somewhere else. Perhaps if we could speak to Jaya alone, Ajani suggested. We could persuade her. She is no diplomat at heart. Karn stared at the varnished thrush, still, so attentive. Perhaps. Karn let himself into the negotiations. Sten was sitting in an inkwell on the granite table as Joda and Jaya gave both Rada and Aaron Capuchin quill pens. He did not wish to interrupt before they signed. The sea breeze poured over the balcony, cool with springtime's edge. You are an impressive leader, Aaron said. Anyone who takes you for a simple warrior must soon regret it. Joda smiled. Rada, Aaron will bring this agreement to the other houses to present for ratification. I will accompany him to ensure that this process is accomplished within the next few months, during which all hostilities in the Ice Rime Hills will cease. Rada put her hands up, conceding. Yes, the sacred sites aren't worth more war, no matter what artifacts they might contain. A breeze stirred in the room as the pale blue bead of light formed midair. The light whirled outward into a disk that brightened into azure as Teferi stepped through the vortex. He'd aged well. His shoulders had broadened with middle age, gray threaded his hair, and his umber skin had health's warm blush to it. Another planeswalker. Aaron sat back in his chair, exasperated. It must be a sign of intelligence. It must be a sign of interesting times. But we all know Teferi's really intelligent too. Rada said. Joda stood. What has happened? It's... Ooh, Teferi. Teferi. We need a Teferi outfit. What's Teferi gonna wear? Is Teferi gonna wear a purple hat? I think Teferi wears a little purple hat. It looks blue enough. And Teferi's got like a great booming voice. I don't know if I can do this well enough, but we're gonna try. It's the Fyrexians. They were on Kamigawa. Teferi closed his eyes and shook his head. Given what Kaya told me of what she saw on Kaldheim.
They can travel between planes, Jaya said, lips drawn tight.
After a moment. I need to stop throwing my other thing, though, because now where's my Joda hat? Damn. I lost my Joda hat. Oh, it's right here. They can travel between planes. And after a moment, Joda said, that is alarming, to say the least. Had not Karn explained this to both Jaya and Joda? He had seen this with his own eyes. He felt Shieldred's touch on his body, in his mind. Yet Teferi had arrived, bearing secondhand news, and Joda and Jaya believed his assertions. Where were their requests for proof of a location now? Karn might as well have been a statue for all the regard they had given him, and the threat Teferi had warned them of wasn't even on Dominaria. But none of that mattered. Only one fact remained relevant. If the Fyrexians have traveled between multiple planes, then their invasion plans are much more widespread and well coordinated than we anticipated. Rada tensed. Then we must fight. Aaron shook his head. His knights seemed restless, hands twitching towards their swords as if they expected to launch into action. I never would have thought I'd live to see another Fyrexian invasion. The true twilight has come, one of Rada's warriors hissed. How can we battle such creatures? However bad it is, Sten said, what will come is worse. Joda gave his calmest, help me expression. Jaya flapped her hand at Karn and Ajani as if asking them to remove Teferi, the origin of the disruption. Rada and Aaron had not signed, and this made it seem like they wouldn't. Joda looked like he had bitten down on a charged piece of aluminum. I have the feeling that my timing was less than immaculate, Teferi said.
You don't say,
Jaya said, giving them a meaningful look. I am not certain about this mutual protection clause, Aaron began. It might be best to look to our own shores and our own peoples, Rada said. Karn ushered Teferi away towards the door. Teferi let him. As planeswalking had exhausted Teferi, Karn and Ajani led him to the suite adjacent to theirs. Outside, spring rain pattered down against the cliffside. The rosemary plants growing in cracks in the stones scented the air that wafted through the unglazed windows. Did rosemary's scent please Karn because he liked it? Or because Urza had designed him to like it? Karn would never know. Teferi always made Karn consider his origins, not always comfortably. How is Nyambi? Karn asked. She's providing medical aid to the nomadic tribes in Jamora. Teferi's pride in his daughter radiated from him. And Joyra? I have not spoken to Joyra in some time. Karn wished that Urza had made his face with a human's mobility and its subtlety in micro-expressions so that it would be easier for him to signal to Teferi that he did not wish to speak about this. Ajani glanced between Teferi and Karn, as if the awkward silence stretching between them were visible, a piece of string tight enough to twang. Something else is troubling you. I did not wish to say this before the Keldans and the Benelish, Teferi admitted, but they took Tamio. Even planeswalkers might be valuable and vulnerable to them now. We waited too long, Ajani. Ajani froze. Shock plain across his face. Tamio? Teferi nodded wearily. We can discuss it after we've gotten some rest. Karn watched as Ajani's hands curled into tight fists, anger and sorrow crossing his friend's face. He hadn't known they were close. I should rest as well, said the Leonin after a moment. Karn accepted this as his cue to depart. Back in his room, he opened the case with the Silex and the tablet in it. He removed the tablet, relocked the case, and set it on the table. He'd keep this here to research it, but the Silex, he needed that to rehome. Somewhere safe, and he knew just the place. Karn pressed his palms to the scryer's crystal-covered copper. Joyra's image appeared. She was no longer in her workshop, but sleeping, her face crunched into her pillow, her reddish-brown hair laying in a messy braid across one cheek. Karn let her image fade. Evading the Oyster Bay guards was simple. The people here may have once made great pirates, but they had not adopted the organized banality of guard duty. Karn, large in the shadows, avoided any light that would glint from his body. He slipped through the town's carved streets, sticking to the darkness, up and around the top of the cliff. He hiked along the Fyrexian portal ship's spine, its degraded metal softened with wildflowers like purple asters and goldenrod, toward a hill blanketed in young vine maples. Ferns rustled at Karn's shins, and the damp air condensed on his body. Now, a sufficient distance to avoid tweaking Jaya and Joda's senses, Karn stepped through the searing blind eternities, tearing a wound in it, the edges fluttering against his body. He passed through it to Shiv in the Mana Ring, straight into Joyra's workshop, and held a breathless silence like every instrument in it waited for Joyra to wake. Karn located a local supply closet. He stowed the Silex and its case on the lowest shelf below the lengths of pipe whose dust promised that Joyra had not needed them recently. He generated 2 devices, one alarm that would register if the pipes moved, and another weight-sensitive alarm that would notify him if anyone moved the box itself. There, the Silex was safe. Or as safe as it could be. Karn stepped back into the blind eternities. Also, hi, Gabriel. Everybody who's in here right now, make sure to follow and subscribe. We are in Chapter 2 of the MTG lore, Dominaria United. Back on the forest hill, let me just restart here. Back on the forest hill, Karn wound his way downward towards Oyster Bay. A light glimmered between the pale, slender-trunked birch trees. A silhouetted person held aloft a lamp. Karn paused, but the lamp had glinted from his body. He had been seen. The figure moved closer. Sten, the new Argivian noble from the negotiation table. A nightjar called, its low warble traveling between the trees. What if his precautions had not been enough? Out for a walk? Sten called. Yes, I do not sleep. You are awake late. No, up early. As Sten neared, his features grew clearer. His beard was trimmed and his hair tidy. Dawn is the only time I truly feel safe, at peace. With the smell of baking bread wafting over the city, with the citizens starting to wake, I can imagine we aren't at war. Morning had begun to whiten the sky. The air tasted like dew and cinnamon. I overheard the other planeswalkers say that you're immune to Fyrexian influence? Yes. This means you may be the only planeswalker who can be trusted. Sten's sable mantle beaded with water. You aren't the only one who can read the signs of invasion. King Darian has tasked me with discovering Fyrexian agents. Obviously, this is not common knowledge. What will you do after you discover such an agent? Karn asked. What must be done? The only thing that can be done once someone is completed. They are lost, whether they know it or not. They don't know themselves? No, Sten said. I think they are more useful to the Fyrexians and harder to discover if they themselves do not know. It made sense that those forced to act against their own interests, their families, and their very plane would be kept oblivious from their own actions. The Fyrexians had to be inserting these unknowing sleeper agents everywhere. Yet to kill such people who had already been so wronged? King Darian must have selected Sten for his ruthlessness. Have you ever caught such an agent? Karn asked. No, not yet. Sten gazed at the dawn-glazed sea. Fishing boats skidded along the waves, tan sails belling. Teferi's news frightened them. Karn nodded. They should be frightened. Do you think Benalia and Keld will unify? I don't know, Sten admitted. But I do know that I can promise this. New Argive will mobilize. We will stand with you in defense of Dominaria. Karn nodded, relieved that someone had taken him as a credible source. He had found his first ally willing to provide military support. We can discuss details later. In the town, few seemed wakeful, only bakers tucking yeasty loaves into ovens and children milking goats and feeding chickens. Sometimes Karn imagined their pains, losing a pet rooster to the dining table, spilling a much-needed bucket of milk. Long after these people had died, Karn... Oh, bam, getting older. I do have the puppy with me. Eleanor is here if you want to pet the pup redemption. Thanks for the resub, Gabriel. Long after these people had died, Karn would continue to ponder their lives. He felt old and tired, and the children's fateful brevity seemed an unbearable tragedy this morning. Although, Gabriel, if you do a Pet the Pup redemption, let me know, because I'm using a multi-stream app and I'm not sure if it'll give me the Twitch notifications or not. When Karn reached the city hall, Ajani was awake, pacing between banks of ropey wisteria vines. Ajani paused, his body quivering with tension, and his tail lashed once. You did the Pet the Pup thing. Okay. Yeah, it's good I don't see it. So I'll get that in just a moment. He had seen how the Leonin seemed to smother his non-human mannerisms when near humans. Ajani's blue eye caught the light in the dimness, pupil glinting a predator's green.
Eleanor, we have a Pet the Pup! Come here!
Karn, do you... Oh. Karn, do you think the humans are awake yet? Ajani asked. Joda and Jaya will sit the representatives down at the negotiation table once more today. Karn could summon no patience for how Joda continued to prioritize the small human conflict before the Fyrexian threat. Some are. I encountered Sten this morning, and he has pledged the new Argives forces. Then let us speak to Jaya before negotiations recommence, Johnny said.
You two would be much more compassionate towards me right now if you had heard of this substance called caffeine,
Jaya muttered. I've heard of it, Karn said. It is vile, Ajani said. Teferi entered the room and opened the doors to the balcony. The chilly sea breeze freshened the room, bringing with it springtime's rising birdsong. A seagull landed on the balcony and cocked its head, looking at Teferi's beard roll in a meaningful way. A varied thrush landed on the rail, then jumped along it. Could it be the same bird as yesterday? How could such a shy woodland bird with its orange breast tolerate a seagull? It is important who can charge what taxes at what border, Johnny said. We should be prioritizing the fight against the Fyrexians. Correct. Karn eyed the thrush, and keeping the Silex from Fyrexian hands. The Silex? Ajani started. You have it with you? I had it in my possession, Karn said, as I plan to deploy it on New Phyrexia and eradicate the Fyrexian threat as its source once I determined its workings. Karn, we agreed to handle this together. You can't go there alone, said Teferi, serious. You said that yourself, that we waited too long. All of you promised me your help, and then you told me to be patient. No longer, said Karn. The thrush was not even pretending to peck at invisible crumbs. Karn seized the bird. I know what you are.
Karn,
Jaya said. The bird's chest peeled open. Cables shot out. The cables, slick with blood and slime, wrapped themselves around Karn's head. Goo slipped down into his skin, and a maw at the tentacle's core searched along Karn's cheek for purchase, its teeth scraping down the smooth metal. Karn readjusted his grip around the creature's slippery body, trying to pull it from his face, but its wires had wrapped all the way around his head, locking together in a thick tangle at the nape of his neck. The creature's teeth caught on Karn's lip. It jabbed needle-like protuberances into him, like it wanted to inject him with some substance. The needle snapped.
It's too close, Jaya shouted. I can't blast it.
Let me, Ajani said. Slime sloughed off the creature and sizzled on Karn's skin, corroding his metal. It hurt. The creature snaked its tentacles between the joints on Karn's neck, around his collar, as if trying to prise him apart. Karn grunted and squeezed his fingers between the creature's slippery body and his face. He forced it off him, flinging it across the room, and it smacked against the opposite wall and slid down. The creature caterpillar crawled toward the door. Teferi raised his hand, slowing the creature within a blurring field to prevent its rapid escape. Ajani lunged forward and pierced the creature with its claws, pinning it to the floor. It shrieked and writhed. Acid spurted from the wound. Karn, face still steaming from the creature's corrosive slime, held out both hands, one over the other. He generated a bird cage, building it upwards until the bars united into a dome. Ajani ripped the monstrosity from the floor and flung it into the cage. It rattled the bars, screeching. Jaya crossed her arms.
Turns out, Joda has bigger things to worry about than taxes.
Eleanor, you have a Pet the Pup redemption. Where are you? Eleanor! Come here. I have a treat in my pocket. Actually, I don't. I should get a treat. Let me go get her. Hang on. Let's switch to this camera so you'll be back on it when we come back. Okay, I have a treat now for Eleanor. Eleanor, are you coming? And she was following me down the hallway, allegedly. Eleanor, come. There she is. There she is. I got some treats up here for you. Come here. You have a Pet the Pup redemption. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come over here. Oh, yes. Oh. Yes, you Pet the Pup. Boop the snoot. Boop the snoot. Yay! Thanks so much for the resub, Chris. Good timing, huh? Yes, oh, good kisses, good kisses. Yes. What a good girl. You gonna grumble for them? Do some grumbles? Is it too warm in here? You see the other camera real quick? Go there? No, she says no. No grumbles for chat. Okay. I know. Thank you, Eleanor. Here's another treat. You're a good girl. What do you think of the story so far, chat? I can't believe they doubt Karn. Don't they know Urza made him with the mind of a robot? Like, come on. Doubting Karn is like saying you doubt Urza. I missed it. Can you start over? Well, lucky for you, Chris, I am recording this on and streaming it to Twitch and YouTube. So you can actually find the recording elsewhere afterwards. Okay. Yeah, exactly. They are the same thing. Urza, Karn, Urza. It's his mind. Why would you doubt Urza? That's Urza speaking through his machine he left on the land. All right. Well, let's jump back into it. Let me close the door for the background noise. Excuse me. Ooh, shake it out. Ooh, and oh, did I lose it? Really? Really? I probably did. Down here on the floor somewhere. That's sad. There it is. Okay. Okay. Back to the story, Fab Fam. Thanks for that little intermission. For the pet the pup. We got all of our props nearby. Here we go. Karn placed the Fyrexian bird on the granite negotiation table. Joda leaned toward it, his eyes widening. The creature in the cage hissed at him. Aaron Capuchin looked sick. His Benelish knights had not moved, their discipline ironclad. Rada stared at it, eyes glittering. Her warriors had broken out into mudded players. Sten's lips had thinned in satisfaction that his point was made. "They're here," Joda muttered. "Among us." "I told you," Sten said. 3 of the Benelish knights exploded outward from their armor. Their eyes burst open in a shower of glistening black oil, and their jaws distended, metal teeth emerging from their flesh to stud their gaping maws. Metallic fibers wriggled out from between the gaps in their armors. One of the creatures swung towards the granite table, his clawed hands drawn together in doubled fists. It slammed its hand down on the grabbit table, cracking it in two. "The negotiations are over," it said. Its comrade seized Aaron with its writhing tentacles, bundling him up like a spider would a fly. Karn strode forward, Teferi and Ajani flanking him. Jaya held up her hands, summoning fire into her palm. Joda gathered energy, distorting the air around him with ribbons of color, and then solidified it into a force field to protect the unchanged Benelish soldiers from the Fyrexians. "For Gerard!" one woman bellowed, lifting her sword. She dodged past Joda's barrier to charge her ex-comrades. The Fyrexian knight avoided her blow by splitting itself in two. It slid apart in 2 meaty pieces, legs sprouting from what had once been glistening internal organs. Both halves attacked. "The first wind of ascension is Forger," Rada called, backing toward the door. She, like Aaron, had come to the negotiation table unarmed. "Burning away impurity," her warriors bellowed, forming up around her to protect her. They fought off the lashing tentacles that reached to seize her, chopping off the Fyrexian's limbs. But any appendage that hit the ground seemed to gain life on its own, sprouting legs and teeth, squirming towards the retreating Keldans. The Argivians fell back, joining the Keldans, fighting with their rapiers, the weapons of nobles who had never seen battle and never expected to. Sten himself only wielded a dagger. Separated from his people, he backed away and from the shards of the broken table until he reached Jaya's wreath of protective flame. Karn had almost reached Aaron. The Fyrexian holding him released a low laugh like an opening steam valve. It rolled its body around Aaron and bounded onto a neighboring balcony. Ajani snarled with frustration and launched himself after it. "Ajani!" Karn could not follow. The balconies would break under his weight if he tried to leap after light-footed Ajani. Karn made a noise low in his chest with frustration and took a step back. Teferi cursed. I'm turning off other things. I'm funny. I can't jump the distance, Teferi said. The Keldons had reached the door. I do not wish to leave you, Archmage, Rada shouted. Keld stands with Dominaria for Dominarians. We will battle this blasphemy alongside you to defend all peoples. Go! Joda shouted. We will fight together another day. There are too many of them, Karn said. Blockade them in this room. Rada nodded once. The brass double doors slammed shut, locking the planeswalkers and mage into the room with the Fyrexians. Jaya swirled her hands up and around, blocking off the Fyrexians from Joda, protecting him. Her flame burned white with a vicious heat. Karn had no doubt that Jaya's magic could defeat even this. He pushed himself through the heat. It seared the tentacles trying to wriggle into the joints of his body, ending them.
Much as I'd love to do this all day, Jaya said, throwing a fireball at a writhing hunk of metal and flesh. Joda?
I have summoned the energy. Joda's eyes were aglow with it, his skin incandescent. But I need to know where to direct it to create the portal. A secure location. Argivia! Sten gasped. He flicked a piece of tentacle off him with his blade and stomped it. Blood and oil spurted beneath his foot. Beneath his boot. Same difference, really. He turned toward the next encroaching tentacle and speared it through. New Argives Watchtower! It is as safe as any place as any. It is as safe a place as any. Karn retreated toward Joda, Teferi at his side. Joda's portal spun into existence behind him. It opened like a doorway cut into the air itself, revealing a small circular room. Joda retreated through it to sustain it from the other side.
I'll hold them off, Jaya said,
searing the writhing cables with her fire.
If you can get through the portal, I'll blast this room with such fire that not a single piece of Fyrexian will remain. Go!
My thanks, Sten said. He backed through the portal as well. And mine as well, Teferi said, and vanished through the whirling vortex. Jaya grinned in triumph as she raised her hands in a blaze of fire and set the whole room alight. The screams of Fyrexians, wet and unnatural, whistled. Karn stepped through the portal. The magic tingled across his skin and swallowed him, depositing him on the other side. A shape, airborne, flicked past him. Karn turned to search for it. He couldn't see any movement in the small room, but for those who had arrived with him, Sten, Joda, Jaya, Teferi, and himself. Jaya, the last through the portal, joined Karn at his side. Joda closed the portal and collapsed, sagging to the ground. Transporting so many people was no easy feat, even for Joda. The humans all sat on the floor, sweating, panting, bleeding, while Karn remained standing. He searched the room for the flickering shadow. The tower room had a tiny arched windows ringing it and was empty but for a pedestal in the center, which seemed to have a control panel on it. Overhead, a golden light shimmered through a crystal. No, not a crystal. A power stone. A shadow flitted across the power stone's face. One followed us, Karn said. Eleanor just opened my door. Silly ghost. Silly puppy. One followed us, Karn said. We must not... Eleanor, are you serious? Stop it. Okay, if somebody does another Pet the Pump redemption, you're going to have to let me know. We must not let it escape. Sten flipped a toggle on the central control panel. The watchtower thumped as gears ground to life. The wall's interior echoed with the rattle of moving chains. Steel shutters and blast doors slammed shut, blocking out all light. The room instantly felt stuffier, more claustrophobic. Sten handed Karn the key. You are the only one who's incorruptible, so it's only right that you have it. Jaya bumped her shoulder into Joda's.
You never get tired of hearing that, do you? Or you never get tired of being right, do you?
The millennia may wear on, but no, I do not. Joda's smile faded, then he turned to Karn. Nothing and no one may leave while this tower is in lockdown, Sten said. Teferi eyed the steel shutters. We must capture and destroy the Fyrexians trapped here, and we must determine if any of us has been compromised. We need to know who we can trust before we can plan how to defeat them.
Agreed,
Joda said. The group checked the room. The small Fyrexian thing that had come with them had escaped the chamber. Karn surmised it must have squirreled itself away through some cracks in the stone. He strung the key from the same chain he used to hang the scryer and the beacon to summon the weatherlight and turned to face his companions. A frisson of unease traveled through his body, as if an electric current arced through him. Joda, Jaya, Teferi, Sten. How could he determine who he could trust? If the Fyrexians were already on Dominaria, who could anyone trust? And that is the end of chapter 2. Woo! Thank you so much to everybody who's watching and listening thus far. My name is ZBexx. Make sure you hit that follow and subscribe button. I am a professional cosplayer and Magic the Gathering personality. Legacy is the best format. I love Dominaria. I'm so excited to be back. So I'm reading the Magic the Gathering Dominaria United story for you. We're done with chapters 1 and 2. Let's go on to chapter 3. And I need to lock down my OBS because I got all this stuff lying around here. I can't see my buttons. I should move this also over here so I don't have to mouse over as far. There we go. Oh, yeah. Much better. Okay, much better. Much better. Okay, what do you think's gonna happen next? The next episode is titled The Locked Tower. So obviously our heroes are gonna have to take care of that little Fyrexian thing, that little thing that snuck in. You've always pronounced her Jaya, not Jaya. Jaya Ballard. I don't know what is the correct way, but I've always said Jaya, because my friend's daughter's name is spelled that way since before I played Magic, and it's Jaya. So that's where I'm going off of. I don't know though. I don't know. There we go. Okay. Episode 3 is The Locked Tower. You trust my pronunciation more? Well, I appreciate that a lot. I'm going to do a little retweet real quick since we've been live for a while. I didn't think chapters 1 through 5 would take this long. But, they're lengthy stories. I might even only go through chapter 3 tonight, just because I do want to eat dinner eventually. Okay, and let's see whose hats I need. I don't think I need Rada anymore, right? Rada is still behind. So we can put Rada down for a moment. Not away, but... And also, I don't think I need Shieldred for a minute. This Shieldred hat is seriously blocking my way. We'll just put it right there for right now so you can see it. All the other stuff there. I realized like I kind of bounced around a little bit. There we go. Ugh. I've moved around quite a bit. Okay, much better. I was bouncing all sorts of around. Hey, Aaron, welcome. Sourdough says Joda is Urza's great XXX grandkid, right? I can't remember. I don't know if they're related. Someone's gonna have to look that one up for us. I don't know if they're in the same bloodline, but I do think that they are, like, he is his predecessor. Or Urza is. I feel like putting all these hats on is messing up my hair. But for you, Fab Fam. See, I had this braid, and now the Johnny's thing has pulled out a lot. That's okay. It is what it is. Let's keep reading. Chapter 3. Episode 3. The Locked Tower. Karn wished to be alone. He wished to be working on research. If only he could lose himself in a mathematical formula's crispness. If only he could forget how it felt to have oil and blood drying on his body. But he could not escape. He was locked into New Archives watchtower in a small circular upper room ringed in steel-shuttered windows. The dim yellow glow of the power stone overhead illuminated a pedestal with a control panel beneath it. Only he had the key that would end the tower's lockdown, and he would not use it. Not until they'd captured the Fyrexian, and not until he knew for certain his companions, Joda and Jaya, Teferi and Sten, were free from New Phyrexia's influence.
Where's the Silex?
Jaya asked. Safe, Karn replied. He turned away so that the others could not see his face. He needed a cloth but could not generate one. He held out his hands and drew particles from aether, creating a small wire brush, identical to the one he'd used for so many years to clean himself after Urza sent him to war. His palms fizzed with magic as metal accrued.
Why not tell us where it is now?
Jaya asked. Teferi craned his head as if still searching the ceiling for the Phyrexian spy creature. Even planeswalkers can be corrupted now. Karn's the only one with immunity to the oil. While Karn appreciated that Teferi defended him, he did not like being spoken as if he weren't in the room, as if he were an object. But he supposed old habits died hard. Teferi had been Urza's student before Karn's birth.
I am not a spy.
Jaya seemed insulted. You wouldn't know if you were one, Sten said. I have a plan to find and defeat Shuldred, Karn said. I will tell you what it is once we have secured the tower. Joda rubbed his temples, looking irritable and drawn. Karn suspected portaling them had all strained the mage's capacity. Joda said, I'll trust you. I should have done sooner anyway.
I can't say I like the idea of jumping through hoops to prove myself to you, Karn, Jaya said. I can never understand why you think we have to do it, but I don't like it. My circus days are over, and I was never interested in all that performing tricks.
We need to find the Fyrexians first, Joda said. Splitting up will be the most efficient way to search for the creature, Karn said. Jaya and I can take the upper floors, Joda said. Teferi and Karn can take the lower. That leaves me alone for the basement level, Sten grimaced. I suppose that's just as well. It's mostly one big boiler room. I'm liking this plan less and less. Agreed, Chris. What is this, some bad horror movie? Friday the 13th? I know we're getting into Halloween season for this, but come on. Like, I'm just screaming, no, no, no. Karn led Teferi down the narrow metal stairs. The grating creaked underfoot, designed to accommodate a light human frame, not a ton of metal. The hall on the third floor was narrow, the stone gray. A click, and a mechanical lamps flickered into dim life. The toggle that controls the lights is next to the door, said Teferi, pleased. It may have passed this direction. Karn touched his fingers to a blood and slime trail on the wall at his shoulder's height. Let us follow it. The trail terminated at the door labeled Storage Waterworks. Blobs of slime coated the hinge as if the creature had squeezed through the gap. Teferi crouched. He did not touch it, but his hand hovered over the goop. He looked up at Karn. Should we call the others? Not yet, Karn paused. We don't know if the creature is still here. Teferi opened the door a crack, then paused. When nothing jumped through the gap, Teferi swung it open and stepped through. Karn followed. Tall racks of unused copper pipes loomed to one side. The other side had steel shelving that held wooden crates brimming with gears, flanges, and valves. Karn could see no further sign of the creature's passage. Nonetheless, Teferi, let us search the room. Teferi opened the door a crack, then paused. The tight passages between the storage racks were designed to admit humans. Karn felt large and unwieldy. His elbows clanged against the pipes. He jostled boxes when he pressed through the narrow aisles. He paused and knelt, ducking awkwardly under a low-hanging steam pipe. Blood dripped from the underside of a shelf. He traced the fluid upward to its source. It looked as though several pipes were bleeding. A throbbing chunk of meat had attached itself, barnacle-like, to the copper. It released a gout of acid, dissolving the metal, and then it regurgitated a metallic barb from its side. Karn reached out to the freshly deposit and crushed it. Karn! I need you over here! Karn traced Teferi's voice and found Teferi standing in the corner near a wooden rack with tubs of sealant stacked upon it. Teferi pressed his fingers to his lips, tilting his head in a listening gesture. I don't like this. Joda's voice carried through the pipes clear.
Don't like what?
Said Jaya. Karn frowned at Teferi. Teferi pointed at the vent. That Karn is having us search before telling us his plan. Joda sounded bothered. Shouldn't we talk this through together? Work out the details as a team? Karn traced the vent with his gaze, the pipes disappearing into the ceiling. Despite Jaya's earlier objection, jumping through hoops, Karn heard her low laugh.
So you're assuming your way is the only way to do this? Remind you of anyone?
Jaya, it's not like...
Go on. Jaya's laugh rang. Protest some more. That'll really make your case.
The voices faded. Karn contemplated the overhead vent. It seems possible that the Fyrexians can spy to use these vents to travel between floors. Teferi pointed, without touching at the black oil on the vent's corner, then down to a vent on the floor. Karn crouched to view it. It looked as though the metal had been cannibalized or possibly transformed into an eyeball, ringed with small, vicious teeth rather than lashes. Small additional eyes nestled beside it, opening and closing. Overhead, a skittering noise, and then large clicks of metal claws ringing along the vents. Teferi craned. What do you think we should do? Karn pivoted, seeking the noise's source. It stopped. He lost it. Unlike the others, you don't seem to take issue with my unilateral creation of a plan. Urza used you like a tool, Teferi said. I never questioned it. I should have, and recently, Nyambi got me thinking. I wish I'd been more thoughtful when I was younger, more observant, and that I'd treated you better. Hi, Tall. This is my first time reading magic lore as well, so I guess we're doing that together. Thank you everyone for being here. Make sure to follow and subscribe. We're on chapter 3. Karn traced a ting-ting-ting along the pipes. He pursued it into the storeroom's corner and then located a small vent in the floor. Slime and blood slid down the metal slots, thick and clotting. We must proceed back to the stairs, then down to the second floor. Karn led Teferi back into the stairwell. The metal creaked under his weight but did not bend. The bolts fixed it to the stone held. Teferi's words had fallen short of an apology but had been heartfelt. Karn understood that what he was about to do was manipulative given their current conversation, but he felt he had little choice. Thank you, Teferi. I need your help. Even I cannot watch the Silex continuously using the scryer. I have hidden it in a sea cave by Dominaria West. Teferi nodded. I honor your trust in me. I can help you guard it. A shout reverberated down the stairwell. Joda. Karn reversed course. He sprinted up the stairs, the grate rattling under his footsteps. Teferi ran after him, a touch slower due to his human limitations. Karn located Joda and Jaya on the 4th floor in a small office located off the main corridor. Joda flung the squid-like Fyrexian off of him, and it splatted into the wall. Jaya pressed her hands together, hands blasted with a white-hot flame, and the creature split into halves, avoiding the fire, each half sprouting multiple misjointed legs from its gory insides. Hungry mouth boomed along its carapace, rich in tiny, razor-sharp teeth. Jaya parted her hands, dividing her flame to pursue each half. The creature split again, this time turning into 4 small chittering beasts with dozens of legs growing from central gobs of flesh twined around with cables. The creatures scattered, each going a different direction. Karn stomped on one that attempted to squeak past him out the door. Jaya brought her hands together, trapping one between sizzling gouts of flame.
I wouldn't eat them, she said, but they do sure fry up nice.
The creature cried out as it died, a high-pitched noise that subsided into a bubbling whine. Joda gathered more white energy between his hands, but the other creatures had skittered away. Teferi arrived, panting, at the door, hands held at the ready, just in time to see the creatures squeeze themselves through the cracks into the stone, leaving behind nothing but glistening oil, mucus as a sign of their escape. The 4 of them stared at the destroyed office, the smoldering papers, the shattered chair. Sten arrived, dripping with sweat. He tried to peer around for Teferi, then stepped back, bending over. He wiped his forehead again on his sleeve. "Too many stairs," he huffed. "If they split like that," Teferi said, "then we can't know how many are in the building." Karn lifted his foot to examine the pulp beneath it. Interesting.
While some people might find fighting an unknown number of opponents that can seep through walls and attack at any time interesting, Jaya said, I can think of a good 100 other ways I'd like to spend the evening.
"Karn," Joda said, "please, just tell us your plan and the Silex's location." Teferi carefully didn't look at Karn. "After all these years, Karn," Joda said, "can you trust none of us?" "No." "Wise," said Sten. "If Shieldred knew the Silex's location, she would stop at nothing to attain it. Since any of us could be a sleeper agent, we can't risk having that becoming common knowledge, and we don't know how well that thing can listen." "You must be the most stubborn, inflexible," Joda said.
"Just like some people I know," Jaya sighed. "The least we can do is develop a way to locate the creature. It's doing us no good searching it blindly."
"We have biological samples," Karn said. Joda knelt to examine the goop and sighed. "If I developed a tracker of sorts using that material, it could follow organisms with similar tissue. But it wouldn't be some Fyrexian detector. It would only be able to locate that one creature and whatever it split into."
"Sounds better than nothing,"
Jaya said. Joda looked up at Karn. "Could you generate impenetrable metal shells around the material? I don't want to risk handling it, but we'll need to have the organic material with us to guide the power and the spell." "Yes," Karn said. "Do you have further guidance regarding the object's construction?" Joda considered, then added, "Put a needle on it. I'll enchant that to guide us directly." "Similar to a compass," Karn said. Joda nodded. Karn created the metal item to Joda's specification. He created each one to be the size of a clamshell, small enough to fit in human hands, and built it up around a gob of Fyrexian flesh. He handed them to Joda. While Joda grasped them and muttered, weaving his radiant spells, Karn stepped off to the side. In a small nook between the crates, he kept his back to the others and generated a miniature scrying device, similar to the one he had made in Oyster Bay, but smaller. When he was done, he intended to hang it on the chain around his neck alongside the weatherlight beacon. He missed Johnny and wished the Leonin was here to help him. A haze filled the amulet's crystalline surface. Karn frowned. Johnny, was he here? The scryer shuddered, then resolved. Johnny seemed to be fighting. Karn could not make out the shadowed forms that Johnny exchanged blows with, but he suspected them to be Fyrexian, which explained the scryer's difficulty focusing on them. The image clarified, and Karn saw Johnny speaking with a young Capuchin knight, a woman with a brash set to her shoulders. He sought the sea caves by Dominaria West. No Fyrexians searched the coast. The area seemed serene. If Teferi was a spy, he had not yet reported to Shieldred. Karn frowned.
Karn,
Jaya stopped. Frustration clouded her face.
Who was that?
Sten peered around her. Yes, what is that? Karn hung it from the necklace. It's not of concern.
Joda finished your amulet, Jaya handed it to him. He's almost done.
Karn inspected it. Its locator needle swung, bobbing between 2 points as if confused. Joda pocketed his. I'm going to return to checking the upper floors. Jaya moved to go after him, but Karn lifted a hand to stop her. Your long-standing friendship aside, I do not think your quick tongue has a calming effect.
True, Jaya conceded. Sten, given this creature can ooze through walls, are there maintenance areas we should be checking for infestation? Crawl spaces?
Yes, actually, Sten said. There's an elaborate venting system to allow air to escape from the lower levels, should the city need to retreat into the earth for defensive reasons. Teferi whistled, clearly impressed. I'll go with Joda. Then I shall take the basement alone, Karn said. Better you than me, Sten said, fervent. That room is disconcerting. There's so much noise from the boilers that you'd never be able to hear something sneaking up on you. Karn waited until Sten, Jaya, and Teferi had left the room. He headed down into the basement level, locator in his palm. If Joda were compromised, would the enchantment even work? The basement level consisted of a short but broad corridor edged with pipes. Unlike the pipes in the storage above, these were live, hissing with steam, their shutoffs cranked open, their valves leaking. The room held boilers and hydraulics constructed with intricate beauty from copper and steel, each rivet lovingly set and integrated with Thran technology. Ah, Karn! Joda entered the boiler room, shouting to be heard over the din. Teferi followed him. I've been looking for you. I think I need to recalibrate the locators so that the needle only points towards the nearest creature. It's also having a hard time differentiating up from down. If you could... Jaya and Sten opened the door.
Just who I was looking for, Jaya said. This thing you made isn't working, Joda. It's useless. It keeps on pointing and then moving like it can't make up its mind.
But Joda stared at her. Are you bleeding? Jaya clutched her arm, eyes narrowed.
Never seen a flesh wound before?
Why didn't you tell us? Joda asked. He glanced over at Karn meaningfully. Karn handed Joda his locator.
Why would I? I'm not 5 years old.
Jaya sounded insulted.
It's just a scrape.
That's not what I meant. Joda stretched his fingers over the locator, pulling up a meshed spell network from the device and tweaking it. He flicked his fingers down and the spell settled back into the middle. Joda returned the locator to Karn. What if the glistening oil has gone inside you?
It didn't,
Jaya said, icy. If that's true, then why hide it?
I wasn't hiding it, Jaya said. It just wasn't important.
Thanks so much for the follow. In the floors rattling above. A rattle, then a boom. It sounded like something had overturned one of the racks filled with pipes. Karn calculated that several dozen pipes must be rolling on the floor to create such a din. It must be upstairs. Teferi, Sten, you investigate with Jaya. Teferi nodded, his face solemn and his eyes on Jaya. Perhaps he thought Karn intended for him to watch Jaya due to her wound. Karn did not think glistening oil could infect so quickly, and yet, how could he be so sure? Joda handed a locator to Karn. Could you change the needle so it rests on a bearing? Or at least something that can pivot? I think it should be able to point up and down as well as a circular motion. Karn nodded and set out to work altering the mechanism. Joda leaned over the locators. He drew his hands over them, pulling up the spells so they hovered midair in delicate glowing magical networks. He tinkered, altering how the nodes and colors connected. Normally, Karn enjoyed working on someone's shoulder on a mechanical task. It was peaceful, but not so with Joda. Joda leaned back on his heels, pushed his unkempt hair back from his face. He wore a rueful expression, its ageless quality at odds with his apparent youth. You've seemed different since your return from New Phyrexia. When Karn had returned to find that Joyra and Joda had been involved while he was away, he'd been startled and uncomfortable. Even when Joda and Joyra's relationship had not continued, its after effects had. Karn considered responding more tactfully, but who knew what a moment of honesty might reveal here? Recently, the way you offer advice has reminded me of Urza. When Karn had returned to find... and I, the ancient, the wise, and powerful wizard, may have grown arrogant over the eras. Joda pressed his hands into the spells, pushing back the magic into the metal. Joyra sees you as vulnerable. It made me feel like I had to look out for you. For her sake. The needles and the locators quivered, each swung wildly, spinning in different directions. I would prefer to be your partner in this venture, Karn said. Partners confide in each other, Joda said. Karn pretended to hesitate. He nodded slowly. If you were compromised, I don't believe that you would be so obvious in your anger and impatience. The Silex is located in a warehouse in Istark. Joda laughed at that. Ah, ha, ha. Well, thanks for that, I suppose. The needles pointed in different directions, all directions. Joda stared at the locators, dismayed. How could this go wrong twice? How could it go wrong twice? How could I get this wrong twice? You did not, Karn said. The walls rustled with sudden movement. Yo, yo, yo! Is dinner ready? Okay, I'll finish this chapter and then I'll be out. We're only getting 3 chapters tonight, folks. Where were we? Creatures flung themselves. Here we go. The walls rushed with sudden movement. Creatures flung themselves at Karn and Joda, cables outstretched, the mouth seeking. Joda attempted to ready his magic, but light all around his hands was dim, flickering. He had exhausted himself from portaling them to the tower, then again from creating the locators. A half dozen more creatures launched themselves at Joda, wet and fluttering. Karn adjusted his stance to defend Joda. He seized a creature from the air and ripped it in half. He flung it outward towards the other creatures. He swiped another from the air, but there were too many. Some got through. Joda seared one with a blast of pale light, then fell to his knees in exhaustion. Creatures had started to climb up his body, their probing mouths searching for his skin. Even though Karn's instincts cried out for him to watch the walls, he turned to Joda. He peeled off the creatures, ripping clinging tentacles in the process, and flung them aside. The disconnected tentacles bound to Joda in clots. The clusters began to grow, sucking mouths. Flames roared through the room. The roar deafened Karn. Heat rushed through the room, sterilizing it and pouring over his body in sheets. It felt pleasant, warm, and ticklish. The flames poured forward and licked at Joda gently. The creatures lodged on his body, bubbled. Karn reached forward and this time was able to remove the remaining clinging creatures one at a time. The limbs drooped free. He pulled the rest from Joda's prone body, then turned to face their rescuer, Jaya. Her fire centered around her, white hot, and illuminated her face. Its light cast the lines worn into her skin into a relief, and the heat rippling the air caused her white hair to lash around her. Her eyes reflected the firelight. She smiled, her lips tight. Sten ran into the room. Jaya's blast wrapped around him, not touching him, but repelling his Fyrexian attackers. He stabbed a small creature, skittering around the floor, pinning it. Its legs writhed, outstretched and twitching. He used the dagger to bisect it.
He okay?
Jaya nodded at Joda. Yes, Karn said. The good news is that your locators appear to be working correctly. Karn peered over at the locators. They pointed upwards, but their needles did not quiver with tension as they had in the moments before the attack. He picked up his locator, then turned to the walls to see how many Fyrexian creatures had crept up on them. He could find no hints as to how so many had approached undetected. Inside the walls, Thran technology glistened gold. It probably connected to the power stone and powered the hydraulics. What a relief. Joda's laugh turned into a cough. Where's Teferi? Sten asked. You think he'd have heard the commotion. The silence descended into discomfort. What if the mass attack had been but a distraction so that Teferi could now transmit Silex's location to the Fyrexians? What if the Fyrexians even now searched Dominaria west, laying waste to its coast? Karn wished to look in his scryer, but dared not give his advantage away.
I'll go look for him,
Jaya said. Karn moved to join her, placing himself at her side. Perhaps he would have an opportunity to examine his scryer. And I will, and as will I. Sten crouched near Joda. I'll stay here. He's not looking so great. Joda waved Sten away, weakly. I need just a minute to recoup my strength. Go on. If Teferi's alone and he suffers an attack like the one we just suffered, the results could be dire. He could be completed or killed. And you're too weak to fight off a second attack alone, Sten said reasonably.
You're too proud of an old man, Jaya said. Learn how to accept it. And learn how to accept help.
Just really accept everything, dude. Get over it yourself. From how Joda's face pinched, Karn guessed this was an old argument between him and Jaya, one that he had not been privy to. Jaya waved Karn along with her, and the two left the basement, returning to the rattling staircase. They climbed upward in silence. Karn's footsteps, despite his care, seemed loud, metal against metal. Jaya ascended, sprightly as a cat. Your magic is extremely effective against the Fyrexian creatures, Karn said. Though Karn could not see Jaya's face, he could hear the grin in her voice.
Have to say, controlled pyromania is the best part of being a fire mage. You do get a feeling for what burns.
Your fire seems to sterilize them, Karn said, as if it's inimical. Inimical. Jaya held up her hand, gesturing for silence. Karn fell still. Jaya's shoulders tensed. He could hear nothing. Jaya shook her head and continued upward. I cannot believe anyone with such magic would be a Fyrexian spy, Karn said, though he could indeed believe it. A Fyrexian would be capable of any subterfuge. It's a good thing I'm having dinner soon, because wow, we're getting there. You have killed more of those creatures than the rest of us combined. If something happens to me, someone must know where the Silex is so it can be developed.
You finally decided to trust me. I'm flattered.
Yes, Karn said. It's hidden in Sukata. Jaya didn't pause.
About time you told me that. Keeping the Silex location in one mind is dangerous. Venser's spark or not, no one is invulnerable. Not even you.
She had a point. In the upper stories, Teferi shouted, and both of them took off in a sprint. They found Teferi pinned to the floor by a Fyrexian monstrosity that loomed over him like a hungry spider. Blood soaked his robes from a slash in his gut. Oh no, our Teferi! Not Teferi! Karn tore the creature from Teferi's body, even though its claws, hooked into its flesh, took muscle with it. He slammed it against the wall, pulverizing it. Jaya ran into the room. Get down! Karn pivoted and hunched his body over Teferi to protect him. Jaya bathed the room in fire. Fyrexian monstrosities, dozens of them, too many, screeched in agony. The cries died into despairing bubbling, into whimpering, and then silence. The flames roasted Karn's back, scorching the blood and guts onto his metal body.
Clear,
Jaya said. Karn lifted himself to his feet. Thank you, Karn. Teferi patted the top of his hair and pounded unsinged. Joda, his arms slung over Sten's neck, joined them. Joda seemed drained. He scanned the debris in the room. It had once been an office, complete with filing cabinets. This involves far, far more than one creature, Joda said. You're right. Sten slunk out from under Joda's arm. We use a lot of Thran technology in Argivia, and it looks like the Fyrexians have co-opted it somehow, integrated into it. The thing's tendrils have spread throughout the entire watchtower. Karn examined Teferi's wound. He needed medical attention. Perhaps we must consider lowering the barrier in order to obtain a physician for Teferi. He is gravely wounded. Have you determined that we are all safe? Teferi asked. Can he afford to? Joda said. He could wait. He could second-guess himself forever. He could test us all 1,000 times. How could he ever know? How could anyone? Jaya said,
I think we should eradicate any Fyrexians within the tower before lowering the barrier. If that creature so easily integrated itself into a single tower, what might it do to a city?
What do you think we should do? Sten asked.
Go to the Power Stone, Jaya said. Let's root this out at its source.
Teferi grimaced. If someone can get me up there, I'm game to follow Jaya's plan. We might as well try. I can carry you, Karn said. Teferi gave him a long look, then sighed. It's decided, Joda said. Jaya cackled.
Oh, you've been waiting all night to be the one to say that, haven't you?
Joda still had enough energy left in him to look annoyed. Karn shook his head at their exchange and knelt to lift Teferi carefully. In the uppermost chamber, the Power Stone's glow dominated the claustrophobic space, shining directly down onto the central pedestal's control panel and filling the small circular room with its sickly yellow light. The arched windows ringing the room were still tightly shuttered with steel. Karn wished he could open one and feel the night's cool air on his body. He found a metal access panel and popped it open. The Power Stone seemed integrated into a wire nest, which no doubt connected the lockdown system, the boiler room, the vents, and everything else in the tower. Sten pressed himself close to the panel to look. It's worse than I thought. Karn glanced at Sten. He had told each planeswalker a false location for the Sylex, but he had not yet tested Sten. He spoke low enough that the others would not hear. I need to confide the Silex's location. If I am damaged and cannot reach it, the knowledge cannot be lost. I understand, Sten said, solemn. He did not seem at all perturbed. His focus lay on the wires in the walls. Should that happen, Karn said, you are to determine which among the planeswalkers you can trust so that the Sylex can be brought to New Phyrexia in order to destroy the Fyrexians at their center. I hesitate to ask this, as it would involve asking a planeswalker to sacrifice themselves to repair my mistake. It would be an immense responsibility, Sten said. Karn pretended reluctance, then spoke. I concealed it in the ruins of Trocaire on Sarpadia. That's all I needed, Sten said. His voice, a sudden hiss, sounded horribly familiar. Ooh, maybe it was more like this.
That's all I needed.
Sten threw off his robes from his shoulders. Surgery lines, previously invisible, deepened in his skin. The buttons on his shirt popped free as his chest seemed to swell and swell, only to burst, butterflying open, ribs splayed, iron cords poured from his torso's cavity rather than intestines, weeping mucus and blood. His face, before all this horror, seemed ecstatic, as if he had finally found his purpose and fulfilled it. He raised his head, his eyes focused upward, his lips moving as in prayer. Hand-like claws emerged from his eyes, reaching around his skull to grip it. His metallic intestines slithered across the floor, hooking onto the Thran Power Stone, and his entire body stiffened. The Power Stone's light throbbed, then dimmed as Sten consumed its energy. His mouth gaped, frozen in a voiceless whisper. He had converted his entire body into an antenna, Karn realized, and transmitted his hard-won knowledge to Sheoldred, confiding in her the Silex's location. Its false location, Stop him. Oh. Stop him, Teferi grunted. He clutched at his gut wound, and his eyes brightened with anger. Don't let him. Jaya lunged forward, her hands out thrust. Fire blazed. Sten did not spare her a glance. His body wires reared up from the ground, debris sticking to their gore and wrapping themselves around her like anacondas, binding her hands and pinning them to her sides. Jaya, unable to use her magic without searing herself, struggled against Sten to free her hands, but she couldn't breathe. Her face blued. Karn charged towards her, fast as he tore fibers away from her body, more writhed into place. Small, tight lines threaded themselves between his fingers, defying him. Jaya's eyes seemed so wide, so panicked. Teferi sat up and readied his magic, but his spell, cast in such a weakened state, did little more than flicker into a nebulous blue haze before fading. Teferi moaned and sagged back onto the floor. The blood soaking his garments deepened in color as it wickered through the cloth. Joda ran to Teferi's side, muttering a healing spell under his breath. We have to get out of here, Joda shouted. Karn agreed. The control panel had a straightforward layout. He inserted the key Sten had given him into the pedestal. He opened up the metal lid, flipped the toggle, and the steel shutters jolted upward. The chain within the walls rattled and the gears ground. Cool night air poured into the tower, but along with that fresh air came noises, gibbering and shrieks from the city below. Karn could not free Jaya from the cables writhing around her, so he turned. He dismembered Sten. No, not Sten. The Fyrexian who had killed Sten, who had completed him and taken his place with efficiency. He tried not to think about his actions. He removed bones from sockets and tossed the pieces aside as easily as stripping a chicken at a banquet. Jaya inhaled, her breath a rasp that carried through the dark and then blasted not Sten with a gout of scarlet flame. The fire poured over Karn and sizzled across not Sten's flesh, frying his organic components. The Fyrexians sagged onto the floor, a collection of blackened metal and crisped organics. Joda looked up at Jaya. His hands lay outstretched over Teferi's stomach. I'm too exhausted. I'm too exhausted to heal him. I can keep him from bleeding out, but that's about it. We need help. It's time that I call the Weatherlight, Karn said.
Why don't we give it a few more minutes until things are really desperate,
Jaya said. Karn opened the summoning amulet like a locket. He flipped the toggle inside. Shanna's voice, quiet and tiny, piped up.
What is it, Johnny?
This is Karn. Joda, Teferi, Jaya, and I need to be brought to safety. Teferi is wounded. There was a pause from the other end.
Your location?
Argivia, in the watchtower, under attack by Fyrexians.
Fyrexians?
Karn could hear the weatherlight creaking in the winds. When she spoke again, her voice sounded calm and determined.
You're in luck. We're not far. If the winds favor us, we'll be there soon.
Understood.
See you soon. Shanna out.
The Fyrexian noises seemed to be getting closer, echoing through the vents between the walls. Squeaks and burbles punctuated metallic clinks and fleshy rustles. The entire tower was infested, perhaps even the entire city. Sten had overseen rooting out Fyrexian agents in Argivia. It was fair to assume he had done the exact opposite. Teferi is too wounded to move. We must hold out until Shauna arrives, said Karn. Jaya, you seem to be in the best shape among us. You will lead. I will take up a central position as I must defend Teferi. Joda, keep watch of the rear. Joda opened his mouth. Jaya lit 2 fireballs in his hand. She weighed them and raised her eyebrows at Joda. Joda, abashed, closed his mouth. After a moment, he spoke, mild. I was going to say that this is an excellent plan. And with that, my Fab Fam, that concludes 3 chapters. We still have chapters 4 and 5 that have been released and more to go. But that is it for this evening. What an amazing read-through. Again, everybody, if you enjoyed these read-throughs, please make sure to follow and subscribe. If I mispronounced anything, which I probably did, I'm pretty sure the weapon that Rona was standing on or leaning on, I might have mispronounced it. But yeah, tell me what I said wrong. Tell me, is it Jaya or Jaya? Tell me in the comments. Because we're gonna keep reading stuff and I'll probably pronounce things wrong again. But I appreciate you being here with me tonight. And with that, you are fabulous. Scott Schultz, thanks so much for being here. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow on Twitch. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I'm everywhere. So I'll see you all later. Have a fabulous night.